galactic empire that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space in a one-way journey is Jeremy Kyle. He goes on about his age one more time, how he's 60 this year, he was 59 last year, repetitively over the course of the weeks and months. We have to hear him, I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Oh, no, I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so many to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question, so I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, do you get the job, yeah? Come on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what, there's no.
I think David Lammy would be the person I'd want to send up in space and never come back again.
Yeah, the problem is how much would the bill be for him to munch through whatever food on the way there?
Hey, it worked.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show on this beautiful sunny Monday morning. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend, enjoying some of the spring sun. Are we in summer yet? Spring? I can't. I'm not sure. Must still be spring. But either way, doesn't it make a difference? So it's great to have you on board. I hope you have got well, plenty to look forward to on the show today. And whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio, or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device, it's great to have your company. Let's tell you what is coming up in this hour and all the way until 1 o'clock. Going to be talking about Keir Starmer unveiling a crackdown on immigration. Of course he is. I mean, of course he is. Don't we get one a week? I don't know. This is after this week's local elections with plans to bring down legal immigration. This comes as Reform UK is expected to win hundreds of seats. Talk about it winning the Runcorn by-election and indeed 2 moralities as well. Plus, the independent pay review bodies representing millions of public sector workers, including teachers and nurses, have recommended government gives pay rises of as much as 4% to them. It's in a move that will put pressure on Chancellor Rachel Reeves' budget. Of course, if they don't get those pay rises, then we go back to the threat of strikes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do get in touch on that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch on X as well at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1. Standard network rate message. Obviously, want to hear your thoughts on all of the big topics, but in particular on these independent pay review bodies. I mean, there's no point having them unless you're actually going to listen to them, surely. They're talking about above inflation pay rises, but for 2 groups of public sector workers in particular who, well, they do go on strike. They have been on strike. And when they do, it causes huge disruption to our country, but also crucially, who they have massive issues of retention and recruitment. So is that not the answer? To pay them more? But that will mean other budget cuts, more tax rises to pay for it, more borrowing? Oh, we'd be doing that already. What do you make of all that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Plus, we're going to be talking about the bonfire of the Quangos. We hear so much about that. Every government comes in and says they're going to deal with that issue. Well, hundreds of public officials were paid more than the Prime Minister last year, sparking calls for Labour to rather speed up its promised bonfire of the Quangos. More than 350 Quango bosses received a higher taxpayer-paid salary than the £172,000 Keir Starmer gets. Meanwhile, a review launched after the conviction of Hugh Edwards over his possession of some horrific, people call it child porn. It's not child porn. It's images of child sexual abuse. That's what he had in his possession. This review is going to conclude this morning that the BBC does not have a toxic culture. Of course it doesn't. But bosses need to do more to prevent further abuses of power in the future. Well, we'll talk about that. The ongoing issue of just how many people are on the BBC payroll who have actually just spouted the most outrageous anti-Semitic abuse. BBC Arabic being a particular offender on this front. We'll talk about that and plenty more besides. Loads of top guests. And they include, as always on a Monday, commentator Sam Armstrong. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Always good to see you. Where do we even start? So much to talk about today. A lot of it in relation to the local elections coming up this weekend. Not across the whole country. I'm not got a vote in the London seat that I live in, or the London council I live in, but and a lot of councils that would normally have an election are not having them. A lot of those, interestingly, are the councils which many would have suspected that Reform would do very well in. Nevertheless, the predictions across the board seem to be, even from the likes of many Tory and Labour sources, seems to be that Reform are going to do very, very well indeed in these local elections. Could possibly take the Runcorn by-election. One of the giveaways of that is Nigel Farage has been there 3 times. Keir Starmer hasn't been there once. When the leader of a party, particularly the Prime Minister, doesn't go to a strong Labour seat, they won more than 50% of the vote last time round, before Mike Amesbury, the MP, decided it was a good idea to get drunk and then punch a constituent repeatedly in the face in the street on CCTV. Doesn't usually work out that well, does it? We've got 2 moralities that of the 4 up for grabs may go to Reform as well. Big question marks about whether or not there's going to be some sort of either a town hall coalition, not ruled out by Kemi Baden, not the Tory leader yesterday. Ben Houchen, the Tees Valley mayor, talking about maybe a coalition after the election. But we know where Labour stand on this. Labour aren't fighting that many seats. These are largely Tory seats that are being fought from 2021, a high watermark for the Tories. Therefore, it would be the norm that they would lose loads of seats, even if it wasn't Reform doing well. But Starmer's big plan, put out a story about taking on Reform over immigration. Is it going to wash?
Pathetic, risible nonsense. Can you tell that there is an election in 4 days' time? Surprise, surprise, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland does precisely the same nonsense that they do each and every year when there is an election coming. Oh dear, the voters are looking. Let's look like we give a flying flamingo about the wholesale, drastic cultural and economic change that has been perpetrated on an unwilling, unhappy British public by a political class that doesn't give a stuff about them. Yeah. They are expecting us, all of us, to ignore the fact that this year, so far, already, almost 8,500 people, that's up 40% from last year, have broken into this country illegally. Yeah. They did so with the knowing knowledge of the British state. They did so with nothing put in their way, and they have waltzed into hotels in our countries right across here, where they're put up at taxpayers' expense on the voters of Britain, and now they expect, because they've put a story in the newspapers 4 days ahead of an election, us to not notice, us to not do something about it, and us not to send them a message. It's not going to work anymore, and nor should it.
It's not going to work anymore, and I would be saying exactly the same thing if your lot, the Tories, were saying the same thing.
And guess what? The voters did. And that's why they're out on their behinds, sitting on the backbenchers and not getting very far there too. Because the public have had enough. Yeah. They are not prepared and they are not so foolish to be lied to again.
And what Boris Johnson got wrong was he said, we'll take back control. But if we've got control and we get to import a load of people, we didn't tackle the gangs, the illegal gangs, but also we've got the control and we just get to just bring in as many people we want from other parts of the world, not in the EU, but other parts of the world. But as long as we've got control over that, we're giving them legal visas as opposed to them just being able to come here through the EU's auspices, then that's fine. No, that wasn't what the public said. When they wanted control to take it down. Now, Nigel Farage has now said that on the campaign trail, he's vowing to be deporter-in-chief of illegal migrants. Now, he's had a big falling out with Rupert Lowe, who's now left the party, he's ousted from the party as an MP, over whether you deport illegal migrants, i.e. people, not people who've come on the boats, but people who have overstayed visas. They come on a tourist visa, a student visa, a work visa, and they're still here years later, setting up families, whatever. What amazes me is like, well, those people must be, I mean, are they all, it's like 1.5 million, we think. It's probably not touching the sides. Bearing in mind that when they did the visas to stay for EU migrants after Brexit, they thought there were 2 million fewer here than there actually were. So that's just the people who were here completely legally and they didn't know. So I think it's probably way more than 1.5 million. But I find it utterly bizarre that most people don't, according to our political class, don't think that everybody. I mean, yeah, my priority is the blokes who've come over on we paid the people smugglers and come over on the boats. But absolutely, if you're here illegally, you're no longer allowed to be here on your visa. You should be deported. I mean, I would have a simple, okay, you've got a month, pack up. And leave. And if you don't pack up and leave and we find you, then we get to confiscate your home, everything else. But, you've been given notice, you're not here legally. If I were living somewhere I wasn't legally allowed to be, I would expect to be deported. Why is this a controversial topic? And yet, no major party is touching it.
And our government is, in fact, so pathetically impotent, it cannot even deport the illegal immigrants into this country that go on to commit serious crimes, including crimes against young girls of the most heinous nature. We cannot even get these people out of our country. Yeah. That is how pathetic we are. That is the level that we are talking about. So, as far as I'm concerned, you can forget the ones that have come in here and overstayed the visa. You could even forget those that have broken into this country in small boats. Can you just start by removing the rapists?
The rapists and the drug dealers.
Removing the terrorists, more than 50 of whom are in this country, despite having been convicted of a terrorist offence, who came here illegally. Can we start with them? When are they going to go? Please,
and if your system, whether it's ECHR, whether it's your judges, I think the activist judges are now such a serious issue that we have got to tackle that. The Labour aren't going to do it because they're all their mates. I mean, they're all Keir Starmer did his barrister training with this lot, for goodness sake. So they're not going to tackle it. But if we're not going to tackle that, we're not going to deal with this issue, are we? But I mean, the idea, what they're talking about, and apparently this was all being planned long before this, is the idea is that there would be basically more rules on, say, graduate visas. So people who arrive on a student visa, they study some comedy non-subject, don't actually do any of the studying. They arrive to learn English, whatever, and then suddenly they're getting a job. They're on a work visa at that point. They're taking low-paid jobs in healthcare roles. So basically, if you put a wage threshold on there, so no, you can't stay unless you're in a decent job, as opposed to just washing dishes in a restaurant or serving coffees. That is not a benefit to the country. That would make sense. We've got the accommodation issue, though, because quite clearly the accommodation issue is not going to be dealt with at all. Over the weekend, the Home Office launched a drive for landlords to house asylum seekers following this latest surge in Channel migrant crossings. Goodness knows how much worse it's going to get this week with the calm weather. But Serco is one of 3 private contractors working for the Home Office. They're offering landlords 5 years guaranteed full rent to house asylum seekers at the taxpayers' expense. So you're not going to have to redecorate all the time. You're not going to have to get deposits and do all that. What you're just going to get guaranteed. We are going to pay for 5 years. They will even cover the free property management, all the utility bills, council tax bills, full repair and maintenance, everything. Rent paid on time every month, no arrears, and basically this is a plan to basically take people out of hostels, move them into these flats. But of course, they're paying in some cases double the market rent to get these properties. So you get families who used to have, other families living nearby. No, now you've got a house full of 10 migrants from Somalia, Afghanistan, who knows where, living next door, not working, everything paid for. And of course, families who are looking to rent in that area can't afford to rent, because why would you rent to a family for half the price when you can rent to 10 migrants and the government picks up the tab? This ain't gonna fly anymore. This just ain't gonna fly with British voters anymore.
We've got to the stage where this industry, this crisis, is now big business. If you're a landlord letting out property, if you're a care company that are providing cheap workers, it is in your interest to keep perpetuating this system. And we know, because we've seen what happens in the immigration law sector, what that turns into. They're then lobbying to keep the laws as lax as possible, to keep people in the country for as long as possible. And it has now reached the stage where I think it has reached such massive, totemic, huge, great business that we are simply never going to be able to stop this problem, because it is in too many people's interest to just keep this going. And many of them are friends with politicians, many of them are friends with judges, many of them are friends with lawyers, and they are just going to keep the merry-go-round spinning.
And these sort of human rights obsessed, sort of liberal hand-wringing classes who control media, law, judiciary, now the police, and the political world, and I include this on the Tory side as well, genuinely don't really have an issue with this, but they don't live in the areas where this is happening. They're not impacted by it. They genuinely think that anyone has a right to live anywhere. If you scratch, on this issue at all, you cannot get these people to ever agree that there is a limit to the number of people who should be allowed to come here for whatever reason. And at the end of the day, if you think that, then you don't actually believe in the nation state.
And the group of people they have total and utter disdain for are the white working class people of this country that have lost out on jobs, that have lost out on wages, that have lost out on services and council homes, that have seen communities that they live in changed, not always for the better around them. Well, if they weren't bigots and
racist, Sam, that's what everyone keeps calling them. How's that working out for you guys?
And these are the very people that saw a massive issue of child rape gangs popping up, that tried to raise the alarm in their own way for many years, that were derided, that were mocked, that were ignored, while one of the biggest scandals in this country's history was swept under the carpet, was ignored for all too long. And it is premised upon the bigotry and prejudice that too many people around us here in London feel towards the people of this country that actually go out, do hard work, try and provide for their families and do the right thing each and every day.
And would say things like, but I don't want 10 migrants from Somalia or Afghanistan to move in next door to me. Well, why not, you racist, you bigot? You're like, well, but because for obvious reasons I don't. I've got children, I've got teenage daughters or whatever. For obvious reasons I don't. Do I need to spell those reasons out? Well, yeah, apparently you do. And again, this is the thing. Political classes are not listening. I'm very intrigued by what's going to happen in the local elections. We'll have the results will kind of dribble out over the weekend. Often they can take a little while to come out. We don't get it sort of all so immediately. We don't get that exit poll at 10 o'clock at night and the like. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And of course, if we do see Reform winning in the Runcorn by-election, that will be, I mean, given that was a 50% Labour seat, OK, you've got an MP leaving in disgrace, of course, that makes for a different situation. In by-elections, you would normally expect a new government to be losing by-elections. People have kind of a free vote on this one. But if it is Reform and not the Tories getting that, then we are into the territory of like, well, some of the polls at the weekend suggesting Reform could be the biggest single party on the current polling, growing up and up. And they're getting to the point where they're almost routinely now double what they got at the last general election. Then you're into that tipping point in the first past the post system where they could actually start winning a serious number of seats. Then we are into game-changing circumstances. What do you make of Kemi Badenoch saying there will not be a coalition of any sort, certainly at the national level, possibly at town hall level, because local, otherwise you don't have anyone in control of a council. Nigel Farage has ruled it out. Kemi Badenoch has ruled it out. The man whose campaign you helped to run, Robert Jenrick, for the Tory leadership, he has certainly talked about the possibility that, this is something that could happen in terms of working together if necessary to unite the right. I'm paraphrasing what he had to say in a meeting of students a few weeks back. What do you think will happen?
Well, I think Kemi Badenoch has acknowledged the reality, which is for the first time, Conservative councils are going to have to rely on the votes of Reform councillors that are going to come in their droves after Thursday in order to form functional administrations at a local level. And that's the reality. What Kemi Badenoch wants to do, doesn't want to do, is in a sense irrelevant at this point.
And a lot of Reform candidates in the local elections actually are people who were, and Kemi Badenoch pointed this out, who were actually Tory councillors until a few weeks or months ago.
This is right. Kemi Badenoch is not wholly in control of her own destiny. The British public have run off to Reform in their droves. That's where every single poll we've seen out in the last few weeks suggests they're going to go on Thursday. And she's just going to have to accept the fact that there are going to be deals on a local level, quite widespread by the looks of things, and then be the brakes.
Indeed, it's going to be fascinating to see, isn't it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. 0344 499 1000. Do you want to see a coalition? What do you think is going to happen? Give us a call, particularly on this issue. Is it going to be enough that, that Labour said they're going to start dealing with the issue of legal migration? And illegal. Come on, give me a break. I don't think any major parties are planning to do that. But I also want to hear from you about the strike threats. We're told that looming if ministers reject the independent pay review bodies. I do find it extraordinary. There used to be these battles between government and public sector workers, and then let's set up independent pay review bodies. I think this was a Blairite thing, probably was. Independent pay review bodies. So we're going to decide. We're going to take in information about what's affordable, what people want, what's viable, and they basically give a ruling, and then the government ignores it. Well, don't have them then. It's a complete waste of time. Particularly, we know that, for the likes of soldiers and prison officers and police, they can't strike. And so they tend to get given higher pay deals because they can't strike and just keep everybody happy. And that seems reasonable. But Times has been told that the pay review bodies representing teachers, and there are 500,000 of them, that's 80% of the school budget, isn't it, teachers' pay. They've recommended a pay rise of close to 4%. And for the 1.4 million NHS workers, yes, really, they've recommended closer to 3%. Of course, NHS workers, doctors had got a 22% pay rise over 2 years. But then that was at a time when, we saw inflation at 11% at one point. Basically, there isn't the money for these sort of pay rises. It's not been budgeted for. The government had only budgeted for a lot less than that. There'll have to be, quote, efficiency savings, which means they'll cut frontline staff as opposed to actually cut the backroom staff who don't get anything done. Or we have to raise taxes. Or, I don't know, more borrowing. We're already doing more of that. We saw latest borrowing figures have gone up. I think it was billions more than it was supposed to have been. Rachel Reeves is in a bind. We've got the Trump tariffs as well, adding to the difficulty. Should these public sector workers get these pay rises? Because for me, I'm like, you can't get enough teachers. We have a recruitment and retention crisis for teachers. We have a recruitment and retention crisis for nurses and for doctors in the NHS. Seems to me that the solution to that is to pay them more.
Well, look, here's the intractable problem. We didn't have enough money going into this. And let's be clear, Rachel Reeves is many things, but a world-leading economist she is not. And nor was she a Bank of England economist for quite as long as she made out to be. There we go. But these are massive, big trade-offs that a government needs to make. And I would do away with every single one of these stupid independent pay review bodies. I really would. These are trade-offs that have to be made. These are decisions that have to be made.
Decisions.
They're political decisions. They're for our elected representatives to make, not to be staffed out to some Quango. And I think that this Labour government is actually very, very happy with sending yet more money off to the unions at a time at which other people are being squeezed to the pips.
But
taxes have never been higher.
If the NHS is one of the top priorities for people, and people want enough staff in the NHS to fund those to run those basic services, A&E, GPs, and others, then you're going to have to pay more to keep people. People are leaving in their droves. In the private sector, remember after lockdown, couldn't get enough lorry drivers. What do? They up the pay. Now, why is it different in the public sector? That's the people would expect me to go, it's outrageous. Okay, these people, the average teacher, average nurse, the average person working in these sectors, and people on the front line, they now are paid a lot less in real terms than they were paid 20 years ago. Now, a lot of people in the private sector also have that issue, but we need these people to turn up to work.
Well, but the issue here is, Julia, we are not talking about raising salaries because we have a recruitment problem or we have a retention problem. We're not. We are talking about raising salaries because if the government don't, if there's not more of our tax money spent to go on all of these things, they will go on strike. They will hold this government to ransom. Sure, but, I
don't want them to, but they have the right to do. But would you take away that right?
Well, I do think that you need to get to a situation in which we have basic levels of services provided. So we cannot get to a stage in which doctors' unions, some of whom are very, very militant, some of whom are really quite dangerous, some of the things they're saying, are able to threaten to kill patients in order to get more money for their members.
And some leaders have said, well, if that's what happens, that's what happens. And we know people will have died because of delays, because of the last sets of strikes. And they do rather more useful work than us on an average day. What I'd love to say is, if we've got a problem recruiting nurses nurses and doctors, whatever's fine. Let's up their pay. Or for instance, you know, science and maths teachers in schools. Let's up their pay. But let's not up the pay of the person pushing paper in the background, because there isn't a shortage of people going for HR jobs or diversity jobs or net zero managers and all of that. There isn't a shortage of those people, so we don't need to up their pay as well. Let's do it on a case-by-case basis, really. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, on immigration, on the local elections, you name it. Give us a call. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
It is extraordinary how we're starting to see converts from the Labour government. So Rachel Reeves has said absolutely insane environmental regulations have gone too far and is now the biggest barrier to investing even in green technology. Rachel, where were you? Because you were in opposition when all this nonsense was voted through.
Yes, and we were saying earlier that we shouldn't be worried about a U-turn. You can turn and say, we've actually got the data now. We do realise it's nonsense. We have to work on that sort of basis. We have other issues that we have to tackle where the money can be spent better elsewhere.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. This is Julia Hartley-Brewer and we are Talk, the home of common sense. 10:28 is the time. I've been asking you to get in touch about all of the big topics we are talking about, including the possibility of strike threats if we don't see pay rises as suggested by the independent pay review bodies for public sector workers, particularly teachers and NHS workers, of up to 4%. Andy's got in touch and says unions can smell blood in the water. This is only the start of Labour's pay rises. Catherine says enough is enough. Do they not understand this is causing more problems? Paul says, I agree. Only this week the nurse changing my dressing turned up driving a 73-plate car, poor thing. I don't even know what her husband earns. And Maddie says, disgusted with the NHS, don't deserve a pay rise in my opinion. I mean, there is an issue, the NHS in particular, where we've not seen increased productivity. In fact, I think the productivity is down from where it was in 2019. And I'm really not quite sure why that would be. Dolly says, as a public sector worker, we've had far too much recently and the economy can't sustain more. And she's saying that as a public sector worker herself. Time to start thinking about the national good rather than personal self-interest. Pauline says, strike and be damned. And Desmond says, well, if MPs are getting a pay rise, then it's only fair. To be fair, I think the MPs' pay rise is around, was it so? It's about 2 point something %.
That's right. I think it's actually 1.5%.
Is it 1.5%? It's actually below. It is below. But again, they're on big money. So it's they're on about 90 odd grand. So it's a couple of grand. So that's a big difference. I mean, that's your heating bill covered for the year, isn't it? Because that's basically what it's costing these days. Let's go to Emma, who's on the line in Hampshire. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Hello. You sound very chirpy on a Monday morning.
It's because I only work part-time. I only work...
Hey! I was going to say, it says you're a teacher, and I'm going, where are you? Why are you calling me at 10:30 in the morning?
Oh, I needed to. After almost 25 years, I needed to drop a day.
Yeah.
But I have to say...
I feel you.
I'm a maths teacher, and I have been all my life. But one thing I would say, it's not the money. It's the physical and the verbal abuse. I'm in a good school.
Yeah.
And this year alone, we've had 30 pupils suspended. We've had teachers with a broken nose. We've had teachers pinned against the wall. It's not the money. But I suppose if you look at it, I mean, luckily I'm coming to the end of my teaching. I'm going to get out of it soon, which is brilliant. But I do train other people coming in.
Yeah.
And as soon as they get the abuse and they realise there's nothing you can do, and the children will just laugh at you in your face.
Yeah. You can't batter them back, can you? I mean, in my day, you could have.
Well, do you know, it's really interesting. I mean, we have some horrendous Year 7s all the way through.
Year 7s. So you're talking about 11-year-olds who are violent and abusive?
Yeah. And we actually call now their parents to come in and get them because we literally we can't do anything.
And you're not allowed to touch them or anything?
No, you're not. You're not also... I mean, we have 3 people trained on physical restraint.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when they're banging on your doors, opening your doors, swearing at you, you name it.
And they're big now as well, these kids, aren't they? I mean, they're big, And is it just boys or is it girls as well? Because I think I've noticed a massive increase in the feral teenage girl.
Do you know, for verbal abuse, it's got to be girls. For physical, it is actually lads.
I bet in no other job would people put up with that.
Well, to be honest, when you ring their parents, you don't understand why the kid is like that, because the parents sometimes won't even come in. They'll literally say, call the police.
Yeah, not my problem.
And the police will come in and say, what do you want us to do? Call the social service.
Yeah.
It's just a go-round.
And the other kids, I mean, this is my thing, and the other kids are basically, all that time, those other kids are not getting a lesson because you're dealing with that, all that lesson time. And also they're terrified and intimidated by these kids as well.
Well, the trouble is, it doesn't take long to spread. As soon as, if you've got a child that's on the verge, but you can actually save that child, then that should be the priority.
Yeah.
The trouble is, when they see the others getting away with it, they're like, oh, actually, I can do that too.
Well, I remember when Blair came in with this whole thing, and again, only someone who'd gone to a private school would think this, we shouldn't be expelling children from school, isn't it terrible, Like, anyone who, like me, went to a comp goes, yeah, you absolutely need to be expelling kids, because even if that kid is then going to go to a unit, it's not going to be good, they're not going to get grades, you're saving 29 kids out of 30.
That is it. That is it. Who do you save? Who do you make sure can pass and get into college? At what?
Or be physically safe. So you're saying doesn't matter what you paid the teachers. Literally just going, we're not putting up with this stuff. And again, I've said this a million times. I've written an article for the Sun about this. Like when we talk about kids with mobile phones, is that the problem? Is this the problem? It's so much of it. It's just down to parenting, or in this case, a lot of it, a lack of parenting. Imagine what their homes are like.
We do. We have 4 on staff who go to homes and try and integrate and all of that kind of stuff. But
they're feral.
Is it working? No. I mean, in 25 years, I've seen such a change in education, a frightening change.
Yeah.
We had 3 trainees last year. Not one of them stayed past 2 terms.
Because they're sane, and why would they? I mean, this is the thing. And the good thing is, these young people are going to go out into the world. They're not going to be able to get a job. No one's going to employ them. They're going to have lots of kids, and they're going to be just as awful parents to their kids as they've been parented themselves. And we're going to pay for everything. So lucky us.
Well, you got to do something, because it'll get to a stage
boot camp.
You don't want... the illegal immigrants, I hate to say that, their children are better behaved than actually English children. And I know you don't want to hear that.
No, I would expect that. I would expect that. Discipline, culture, yeah.
You know, we do have illegal, we teach English and all things like that, and they don't do the full GCSE subject, obviously, because they can't understand the curriculum, but they are so polite and so well behaved.
Yep.
It's
very interesting.
Very interesting.
Emma, fascinating call. I could talk to you all morning, but I've got to go to a break. But Emma, thank you. That's such an amazing call. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Emma, Sam, on a well-deserved day off dealing with that. Again, near the workplace, when people, I mean, apart from a football pitch, apparently, where people expected to be barged into, no one would put up with that for people wouldn't put up with that for a couple of hundred grand a year, let alone what teachers are paid.
But head teachers that try and restore a culture in which the teacher is in charge of what goes on in that classroom, gets respect, has the authority to instill discipline, like Catherine Birbalsingh, what are they? They are derided, they are dismissed, they are ostracised completely by a liberal establishment that wants to tell you that, no, the way you do it is child-centred learning. You put the child in charge. That kind of claptrap has been dreadful for children.
Absolutely.
It has been awful for teachers, and it is sending this country down a very dangerous path indeed.
Absolutely. And again, we're paying for these kids for life, and their kids, and their... I mean, this is going to be such a drain on us. 10:35 is time. Your reaction to that, I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Up next, we're going to be talking to Conservative pollster and peer Lord Robert Hayward about what is going to happen at those local elections and the Runcorn by-election this weekend. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:38 is the time. Let's get straight to my next guest, Conservative pollster and peer Lord Robert Hayward joins us. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Beautiful sunny day. Is it going to be a beautiful sunny day for any of the parties on Friday, other than Reform? Because the polls seem to be saying that Reform are going to be doing very well in these local elections. Runcorn by-election, they could possibly win even two of the formalities going up. It looks like for the Tories and Labour, it's going to be a very difficult morning next Friday.
Yeah, I have to be careful because of election law in answering the question, because I'm not allowed to be seen to be promoting anybody in a specific location. But there's no question about it that both the Conservatives, who haven't recovered from the beating they received last July and are starting from a very, very good position in 2021, which is the cycle that we're now on. So they're going to lose lots of seats to whoever.
Yeah.
The Labour Party are very unpopular and ought, under these circumstances, to be gaining seats from the phenomenal position the Conservatives were in 2021. And instead of which, it looks as if Reform in particular, but also both the Greens and the Liberal Democrats will have a pretty good Friday in one form or another.
So it's going to go around the way. And that's the crucial thing, isn't it? 2021 was the last time these seats were fought. I mean, lots of people aren't having local elections in their local area, or they were due them and they've been cancelled because of this restructuring of local government. But these seats were last fought. I mean, basically, an absolute peak. It was the post-COVID Boris in hospital bounce in 21. Tories did very well, and most of these seats are, again, of Tory seats that are being fought. So you would expect that they would lose seats whatever was going on, but also you'd expect Labour would lose seats normally. Anyone who's in government, they tend to lose seats at the next local elections, don't they?
Yes, 2021, Tories did stunningly, Labour did appallingly, so therefore the Conservatives are going to lose lots of seats. What is astonishing is that they aren't going to Labour, even though Labour, as you say, are in government, would normally be unpopular. They're actually thinking they're going to do possibly even worse than they did in 2021, which is going it a bit. And the seats will be distributed all over the place.
Yeah. How significant would it be if Reform were able to take the Runcorn by-elections? Of course, the seat left vacant by Mike Amesbury, who was a Labour MP, won it with more than 50% of the vote at the last election. Reform were second, but a long way behind, weren't they? But after he was convicted of punching a constituent repeatedly in the face in a drunken attack in his own constituency, that seat is vacant. How big a sort of an election shock would that be?
The interesting thing is that we wouldn't now regard it as that much of a shock because Reform are doing well in the polls, but it is significant. It's psychologically significant because Merseyside, and Runcorn's just on the edge of Merseyside, was the one area which Nigel Farage's former parties, Brexit/UKIP, did not do well in. People stayed loyal to the Labour Party in that part of England. And for the Reform Party to do well, to win it, would be a real psychological blow to the Labour Party because of their failure to make progress in this part of England previously.
Very interesting. Well, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, was out and about on the media round on Sunday morning, and she was talking about that while she still rules out any sort of coalition before or after a general election with Reform to unite the right, but that she says, you know, she would leave it to local councillors whether or not there was some sort of coalition to work together in town halls, because, you know, all the parties kind of work with other parties where there's no overall control. That's quite the norm. Do you think, though, that the protestations from Nigel Farage on one side, Kemi Badenoch on the other, that their two parties would A, not form a coalition after an election, and B, would not actually work together in any way, even down to an unofficial, we won't stand in the seat you're likely to win, you don't stand in the seat we're likely to win sort of deal? Do you think that is just all talk right now, and actually when it comes closer to what most likely is a 2029 general election, they will actually do that?
Not necessarily, because we just don't know what politics are going to be in 2029. We don't. It was Harold Wilson, and sadly I'm old enough to be able to recall him saying that a week is a long time in politics, so 4 years is a long time. And I'm sitting here talking to you about 5 parties. If one looks at Scotland or Wales, one's talking about at least 6 parties. Yeah. We are in an era of multi-party politics, but bringing it back to the local elections on Thursday, there will be many counties where no one party has an overall majority. It's quite normal for different parties to go into some form of coalition to ensure that you can administer what is a big spending local authority. Yeah. The county councils have huge budgets.
Yeah, I mean, people, adult social care, children's care, collecting the bins.
Education, which you've just been discussing.
Yeah, I mean, things need to get done. You talk about we're in an era of multi-party politics. I mean, since 2010, we've had 2010, it was sort of, oh, well, this is now coalition politics. 2015, back to two-party politics. And then, we keep having these sort of, oh, it's a new era. It does seem to me that we can't predict anything at all, and we are in such flux. Anything could happen in the next few years.
Well, I've made my predictions for the end of this week, but I'm not going much beyond that.
I mean, and in terms of what the factors are going to be, I mean, we got this announcement from the Labour Party about they're going to tackle legal migrants who come here but then change working onto a different visa, so they come here as a student and then they're working on a work visa, but actually they're working in social care or washing up in a restaurant, and they're well below a wage threshold where they could be a net contributor. Talking about changes, things like that, we've got the issue of illegal migrants. We've got beautiful sunny weather, smooth seas. We're going to be seeing that going up. I think in the next few weeks we're going to get the latest net migration figures updated for the last year. Are those the key issues that are going to settle and decide elections?
There's no question that immigration is an issue. There's general dissatisfaction amongst the public at large with the fact that the previous government didn't tackle the issue and that the current government hasn't tackled the issue. But there are other issues around. You've just been discussing the question of pay awards, teachers' pay, taxation, farming. There's rural areas in a large number of the counties that are going to vote. So winter fuel allowances, you name it. There is what one might describe as the standard issues of politics. But they are national issues, and I'm afraid, in general, people vote as per national politics for local elections. It's a depressing fact, but that is the reality and has been for a long time.
I vote on my bins. I just vote on my bins. That's all I vote on. Who's going to collect my bins? That's all I care about. Lord Hayward, so good to talk to you. Robert Hayward's Conservative peer pollster. Thank you for that. Sam Armstrong. I mean, it is very interesting. Are we in an era of multi-party politics? There's no doubt at all the Greens and Lib Dems are hoping to do very well at these elections.
Well, there's no reason why there should have been a shift. It's not like we've had an electoral system change in recent years. In fact, if anything, we lost the EU system, which was proportional representation, that was meant to favour smaller parties, and we've gone to a system that should favour the big parties. I tell you what's happened, which is the big parties have got into the habit of ignoring the people that vote for them again and again and again. And I have never, ever in my life seen a time in which the political class is further removed from the ordinary concerns of British people.
They talk a good game at the moment. They say the right things, but no one believes a word they say.
Well, it's because they have voluntarily chosen to give over the authority and power to do stuff to Quangos and to officials, and then they turn around and say, oh, we can't do anything. Well, do you know what? The public vote you in. They give you these salaries to do stuff. Get on and do it. Stop over-promising. Start delivering. And then all of these smaller parties, left, right, wherever, will start disappearing.
There's another election this week, and today in Canada. Mark Carney, who's taken over the Liberal Party there, who were massively down in the doldrums with the absolutely awful and useless Justin Trudeau. They now just ahead in the polls against the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, largely because, of course, we all know Mark Carney from Bank of England governor days, but largely because of Trump's attacks and talk about Canada becoming the 51st state. We're going to get that result tomorrow. We're obviously going to talk about it on the show tomorrow. Do you think the polls are going to be right, or do you think the Canadian election is going to go to the Conservatives?
Well, the truth is that this has been an absolute rollercoaster. 4 months ago, you would have said that Pierre Poilievre was nailed on for a landslide. He was held up as an example of how to be a great Conservative opposition leader. I still think that's true, by the way.
He ticks a lot of boxes.
Trump came in and upset everything, but just in the last few days, things are beginning to adjust just enough that you saw one poll out yesterday showed the Canadian Conservatives back in the lead. I think this one is really going to come down right down to the wire.
I have a funny feeling you've got shy Conservatives when it comes to pollsters once again, and actually it's going to be a bit of an upset for the pollsters once more. It's going to be fascinating. We'll be talking about that on the show tomorrow. Right now we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be talking to Ralph Haydu-Mankiw about, I mean, is the BBC toxic? Virginia Giuffre's death and where that leaves Prince Andrew, and much more. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Sarah Brimley and Dwayne Schick got together. They had a romantic encounter. They were playing touch rugby together at the weekends. Their team name was the Bricks. They brought their names together. We've heard couples getting married like Brangelina Benifer, for example. There's a recent poll by YouGov suggesting that the practice of a wife taking on the husband's name when they get married has fallen out of favour with younger generations. 2 in 3 young British women won't be taking their partner's name when they get married.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get to my next guest now. Rafe Hadel-Mankiw is a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum and a royal commentator as well. And both of those job titles will come into evidence in our conversation. A very good morning to you, Rafe.
Good morning again, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk first of all about the BBC. According to a new report, which was a review launched after the conviction of Hugh Edwards, of course, for having the most disgusting, horrific images of child sex abuse, including the rape of a baby, in his possession, but not reporting it to the police, as you don't. Didn't even spend a day behind bars for that, bizarrely. If only he'd written a nasty Facebook tweet and then or a tweet, then he would have been gone to jail. But according to this new review, the BBC does not have a toxic culture, but bosses need to do more to prevent future abuses of power. But they said the corporation has said it will implement its single biggest set of cultural changes after a report showed that they did have shortcomings in how they tackle inappropriate behaviour in the office. I mean, what an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, understatement of the year. I mean, you know, the catalogue of depravity that the BBC lies in, that casts a shadow of the BBC has now been apparent to us all for well over a decade. I mean, I wonder how much the BBC paid for this. This came from some consultancy firm. Yeah. They've just spent another 1.3 million prior to that investigating the Hugh Edwards affair. All that money went to Deloitte. But we've not
how did they spend that much money doing this? What hourly rate are these people on?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. Well, ITV have just done something similar. They've come out with a code of conduct to having had a review into Philip Schofield. And the new code of conduct says, think before you act. Yeah. Treat people with dignity and respect, and try to praise your staff. I mean, that's the sort of quality.
Brilliant. I mean, if only you needed a report to do that. I mean, this is the thing. This is particular about sort of senior figures, the BBC, basically using their power, and it's not just Hugh Edwards. It's other presenters, other senior people being accused of basically using their power to then behave in a totally inappropriate, bullying or sexual way with junior members of staff or freelancers or guests, and nothing is done. And we know again. Loads of people, same with the Philip Schofield issue at the ITV, but the BBC, we pay for them, whether we watch them or not. That, you know, numerous people, I know people who I've worked with myself who, you know, who saw things like Hugh Edwards sort of looking at sex dating sites in the office, for goodness sake, and constantly harassing young male staff, and they go to the senior managers and nothing happens.
Yeah, well, of course, the power imbalances you get in any organisation are always favouring those people who hold the power. But it's even more apparent in places like the BBC, where, of course, you have that star quality around you. And if you are a young intern, if you're someone who wants to make their way through the corridors of power, of course, you're naturally going to be reticent about speaking up. And those brave people who did stand up, and this is what Tim Davies, the Director General, has also admitted, they went forward, they made their complaints, and then they were in limbo. They didn't know what was happening. Yeah, I mean, it was all dropped. And the thing that gets me, sorry, Julia, the thing that gets me is, why is this so late, right? In 2001, you had the BBC presenter Jonathan King jailed, right? Jimmy Savile's revelations came out in 2012. That's 13 years ago. Yeah. That led to Operation Yewtree of Scotland Yard, where we saw, you know, Rolf Harris being jailed, Stuart Hall from It's a Knockout being jailed. This is well over a decade ago. They launched a review at that time. Nothing happened with that review. It was kicked into the long grass once again. And you sort of got the idea that they felt, oh, those were old toxic males of the 1970s.
It's all changed
no longer
now.
like that.
No, but again, and these people obviously know they can act with impunity, and they carry on. I also think it's absolutely fascinating. Yet another BBC employee or staffer or freelancer for BBC Arabic has been exposed as violently anti-Semitic. This is Sema Al-Zanini. He has tweeted numerous anti-Semitic posts. He's been on the telly, on BBC Arabic again and again. He has celebrated attacks on Israel and terror attacks on Jews, and even tweeted at one point, "We'll burn Jews like Hitler did." But no, not a problem for the BBC, apparently. When we talk about toxic culture, that's about as toxic as it can get.
Yeah, well, actually, it's not just the BBC here. You know, we get the police knocking on your door for tweets that you've made. The things that are said in British mosques all the time in Arabic, the stuff that's said on Arabic television satellite channels that Ofcom allows into this country. I mean, those all somehow get missed by all of the regulators, all of our institutions and the police. There's a lot of hate speech going on in foreign languages that for some reason we don't deal with at all. But one thing on the BBC thing is, I just hope that they also don't go too far in the other direction, as we saw with the Me Too campaign, which at its root was very decent. We saw very decent people getting accused of the Me Too campaign. We've had people like Greg Wallace and others. We've had accusations of bullying and Strictly Come Dancing. I don't know what the truth is behind all of those. But people do worry that perhaps we are going a bit too much in the other direction.
And that's the thing. But also the main thing about these things always take far too long, and it's unfair on both people who've made the accusation and people who are accused. And as you say, we're not there in those circumstances. Just want to touch very briefly, because I do want to get in the royal story, but very, very briefly. 2 protesters were arrested after trying to disrupt the London Marathon. They're wearing red powder paint in front of the elite runners at about 10:30 yesterday. Barrows at Tower Bridge wearing T-shirts that read "Youth Demand, Stop Arming Israel." Usual nonsense. I love the fact there is nothing they won't make about them, nothing at all. But just finally, I also want to talk to you about Prince Andrew. Some reports say that there is no way back for him into royal life, despite the fact he obviously thinks he can make a comeback after the tragic death, we believe by suicide, of Virginia Giuffre. She's the woman who's accused him of having sex with her on a number of occasions when she was 17, or when she was sexually trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein. He paid her a huge multi-million-pound sum, even though, of course, he says he has never met her, to end a civil case against him in the States. But do you think there is any way back for him?
No, I mean, he has to be happy now that we'll see him maybe once or twice a year at private family events, like attending Christmas, going to church, as we saw him for Easter at St George's, Windsor. But as I've said before, you know, Prince Andrew has never been judged in a court of law. In fact, we understand he didn't really want to have the settlement paid. No. That was the situation foisted upon him. He felt he should have his day in court. Yeah,
but he also thought he'd do well at the Newsnight interview, and thought afterwards he'd done so. His judgment was probably not very good.
Yeah, but my point is, he's been tried and found guilty in the eyes of the public, and that may be fair or unfair.
Well, just clarifying, have you ever paid anyone millions of dollars to ask them to end a lawsuit with someone you've never met, just out of interest? Because I haven't.
But my point is, it was the royal household who insisted on that. He didn't insist upon that. My point is, though, he was willing to lay down his life for Queen and country in the Falklands War. This comes upon a similar sort of sacrifice, going into the wilderness in order to ensure that the monarchy survives intact.
Yeah, but he's not doing it willingly. There's no way Chaz or William are going to let him back in. Come on.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is what he needs to do. I'm giving advice, if anything else. Yeah. But, you know, he had 2 good things going for him, he thought. One was when Virginia Giuffre dropped charges against the accusation against Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer.
Yep, we're running out of time, Rafe. Sorry, quickly.
And then also when she had that Instagram post recently in hospital,
claiming she had 4 days to live. Yeah, I mean, the awful thing is, I mean, people say, well, she's no longer credible, but the reality is, when people have been treated the way she is treated, as we see with the grooming gang victims as well, they cease to become credible, but because of what has happened to them. Rafe Haydel-Mankiw, thank you so much. So much more to talk about. I'm going to get the thoughts of Sam Armstrong on that coming up next. Love to hear your thoughts too. This is Talk.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
87222, start your message with the word talk. Who would you send to space and why?
The person I would love to send to space would be Mr. Keir Starmer. And then I would tell the Galactic Empire that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space in a one-way journey is Jeremy Kyle. He goes on about his age one more time, how he's 60 this year, he was 59 last year, repetitively over the course of the weeks and months. We have to hear him, I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Oh, no, I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so many to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question, so I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, so you get the job, yeah? Come on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what, says no.
I think David Lammy would be the person I'd want to send up in space and never come back again.
Yeah, the problem is how much would the bill be for him to munch through whatever food on the way there?
Hey, it worked.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. It's just coming up to 3 minutes past 11 o'clock in the morning. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up in this hour, Keir Starmer's unveiling a crackdown on immigration after this week's local elections. Not before. Labour are set to do pretty badly. Tories are set to do worse, though. Plans, though, to bring down legal immigration. This comes as Reform UK is expected to win hundreds of seats and possibly even the Runcorn by-election. Also, hundreds of public officials were paid more than the Prime Minister last year. He's on £172,000 a year, including his MP's salary. This sparked calls for Labour to speed up its supposed promised bonfire of the Quangos, but more than 350 Quango bosses received a higher taxpayer-paid salary than the Prime Minister. That is absurd, is it not? Plus, Donald Trump dramatically turned against Vladimir Putin at the weekend. He accused the Russian leader of stringing him along. I mean, yeah, that's what we've all been seeing, Donald, over the Ukraine peace talks. This came after the US president met with Vladimir Zelensky one-on-one just ahead of the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome. We'll be talking about that. Plenty more besides. Want to talk to you about an awful lot of things that are going on at the moment, in particular about, what's going on in the local elections, but also teachers, nurses and other public sector workers who should be given pay rises of up to 4%. That's according to independent pay review bodies. It's going to be funded by, either spending cuts, other departmental cuts, tax rises, or maybe we could borrow more, or we will see the possibility of more strike threats. I'd love to hear from you. Would you support those pay rises? We're looking at above inflation, but we're talking about, in particular for teachers and nurses, jobs which basically they can't retain people, they can't recruit new people. In the private sector, what you would do is raise the pay, right? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Sam Armstrong is a commentator and he joins me today. Very much great. Appreciate you joining us. Can I just just want to tag on to the conversation we were just having just before 11 o'clock, if you've just tuned in, talking to a social commentator about the BBC, but also the royals and things. But just in particular, on the BBC, there's a new report out today, we understand, talking about the BBC not having a toxic culture. This is into Hugh Edwards and the idea that you've got very senior people who are abusing their power and their position and their celebrity to get away with treating junior members of staff in a not just in a bullying way, but in a predatory sexual way, as Hugh Edwards was. He's, by the way, still got his taxpayer-funded pension. Hasn't handed it back, any of it back, even the pay that he had while he was being suspended. He's got a conviction for the possession of the most disgusting, foul abuse of children, including rape of a baby, sent him, which he didn't report, didn't apparently have an issue with it. Didn't spend a day behind bars as a result of that. People have gone to behind bars just for writing stuff on social media, for goodness sake, but not Hugh Edwards. But the report says the BBC doesn't have a toxic culture, but there is more that it can do in terms of tackling this issue. Does that even remotely come close to covering what needs to be done?
Look, it's classic public sector. You bring in some fancy outside consultancy, you pay them a fortune, of our money, by the way, and they write a report that says, look, nothing to see here, do this, do that, do this, bring us in as a consultancy to advise you on a load more stuff, and we'll charge you a load more money for implementing the advice that we give. But we know that something is deeply wrong, deeply sick with our national broadcaster. And I'm not someone who is hell-bent on being opposed to the BBC. Quite the opposite. I love the idea that we have a national broadcaster, but it has completely lost its way to the extent that nobody I know trusts its news output. Its cultural stuff, it seems to be further and further removed from the lives of our
trans. I mean, that's BBC output now. Sorry, trans. Gaza genocide.
And this matters because we are forced to pay for it, whether or not we watch it, and we know that thousands upon thousands of particularly women every year are hauled before the courts, are handed criminal convictions for not having licence fees, whether or not they watch the BBC. So when you hold yourself up to that, when you give yourself those rights, you have to be held to a higher standard. And there is no doubt that for millions of people in this country, the BBC has consistently failed to meet those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've actually not been one of the, defund the BBC, close the BBC down and things like that. I've not been. I want us to have a national broadcast that we can trust. And they have failed so abjectly on... They failed... I mean, the first time I was really aware of it was on Brexit, and it was just so blatantly biased. It's embarrassing. They failed on lockdown, failed on trans, failed on climate change. I mean, it's just a sort of a woke propaganda machine now. That's all it is. But some of the things they do are just so outrageous. I mean, the constant, anti-Israel rhetoric, the fact that, we just mentioned it, they've actually yet another BBC Arabic reporter found out to have written the most foul anti-Semitic stuff. Not, is this on the line? Is it on the line? No, talk about burning Jews like Hitler did. No, I'm pretty sure the BBC, and in fact, no one should be employing you. I paid this guy's wages. I feel physically sick at the thought of that. This guy should be in prison, let alone being paid by the British taxpayer. And they just shrug and move on. They do not care.
But Julia, this isn't shocking anymore. I'm not surprised in the least. The BBC's idea of a new landmark hire to present a documentary on Gaza is the son of one of the serving ministers in a regime that is run by an organisation that is designated by this country to be a terrorist entity. There's currently an investigation going on as to whether our licence fee money went criminally, illegally, unlawfully to fund a terrorist group.
Very, very serious crime. Indeed, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Now, let's come back to the local elections, because on Thursday, large parts of the country, not all, I've got no elections in my local area, a lot of places that were due to have elections, many county councils not having them due to that change in the... they're going to be having them in a year or two's time, but that means that we haven't got... Democracy has not been suspended due to reorganisation of the local election sort of bodies. But we've had this announcement today, just given clearly one of those stories Downing Street gives to the papers, basically saying, Starmer plans migrant cuts, it's all about fighting reform, something that's going to be announced in May, and the idea is that basically people who come here legally but come here on, say, a student visa wouldn't be allowed to go and just get a job working in a care home or useful work, we know, or working as a barista, because if they don't meet a certain salary threshold threshold, they're not much use to us economically. A lot of people will say, yeah, A, won't happen, B, even if it does, it's too little, too late, C, we don't trust anything you say. And that would go for people saying that about Labour and indeed the last Tory government as well. We know that Reform are, according to the polls, riding high. The latest polls put them ahead of Labour, obviously ahead of Tories. They've been ahead of Tories for a long time. Possibility that Reform could actually do very well in these local elections. They're fielding the most candidates. Most of the seats that are being fought right now were Tory seats. These are county council elections, largely Tory seats that were last fought in 2021, a high watermark under Boris Johnson for the Tories, post-COVID first lockdown bounce. Is Kemi Badenoch right, as Tory leader, to refuse to rule out possibility of town hall coalitions, local councils going in and working together with Reform or any other party to keep services running? But is she right to rule out the possibility of any coalition to unite the right, something that Robert Jenrick has talked about, her rival for the leadership, ahead of general election?
Well, I think Kemi Badenoch has been placed in an incredibly difficult position, and I'll tell you for why. Because if she indicates that she is prepared to countenance a deal with Reform, or that she wants to get on board with them, those Conservative Lib Dem adjacent voters that do exist in the southeast of England in particular are going to flock en masse to the Liberal Democrats. They're not sure of her, they don't like her that much to begin with, all the rest of it. If she doesn't, she's going to lose and continue to lose masses of support to the right over to Nigel Farage. But the ultimate problem, the ultimate source of all of these issues for her is that the Conservative Party is polling at historic lows. If you are down at 20%, as poll after poll after poll of the British public suggests, then as a Conservative Party, your coalition is so fractured that you're going to have to look to the left or right, and as you do so, you're going to lose that other flank. And unless the Conservative Party can very, very quickly, I think now, turn around that overall lack of public support, they are going to be placed in an impossible position, because, as we've been saying, as you were saying earlier, there is a threshold in British electoral politics. It's around 25 to 30%. If you get more than that, you get a lot of seats in Parliament. If you don't, you basically get no seats unless you can focus your votes very, very narrowly. And that's the impossible position Kemi Badenoch is in, while the Conservative Party is polling at 20%.
I mean, Robert Jenrick has talked about, working, uniting, doing whatever is necessary to, to unite the right. We've got Ben Houchen, who's the Lord Houchen's the Tees Valley mayor, very, very, very sort of significant figure of the party, very influential. He's been talking about some sort of unity deal. But, Kemi Badenoch seems to have really ruled this out. There's no love lost between her and Keir Starmer. We certainly saw that at PMQs last week. Not much lost between her and Nigel Farage, although I think they've actually got a hell of a lot in common, interestingly. But certainly, I mean, Nigel Farage has said blatantly, my job is to destroy the Tory Party. He doesn't just want to replace the Conservative Party. He wants to destroy, he's used that word, destroy the Tory Party. Well, is there any room for manoeuvre there?
The great challenge for a merger right now is that Kemi Badenoch clearly views herself as the leader of the opposition, largest group of MPs in Parliament other than the government, and views herself as the standard bearer for the right. On the other hand, Nigel Farage is sitting there on 28, 29% in the polls, and he's saying, look, we're polling so much better than you. So if there was to be a deal, you can see them both saying you should fold into us. And, neither of them have actually got a great deal to offer the other, in a sense, because one's got the MPs and other's got the public.
Yeah. And although the donors, when you say, the Tories have got the machine and they've got the donors, but actually more and more big donors. We've seen another Tory donor moving over to the Reform Party over the weekend, giving them $1 million. I mean, these are big sums of money.
These are mega donors. The Bamfords, own JCB, carried the Conservative Party through opposition for the 13 years, the darkest days of the Tory Party. They have now defected pretty much to Reform. Yeah. Just look at their press conference. Every Reform press conference got a great big JCB.
Is there also an element where, again, there are these sort of bandwagon effects, and we've seen this, I think, with Trump as well. And we've seen this in British politics, and I think it's happening in French politics, Italian politics, German politics. After a certain point, when you're no longer just this tiny party, I see even the way that the BBC and other major news channels talk about Reform Party, it was always just like ghastly Reform Party, ghastly voters. We'll play along, we have to, and then quite disparaging about Nigel Farage, having to acknowledge that actually you know, they are the biggest party in the polls right now, and not being able to talk about them in the same way, having to treat them a bit more seriously when, you know, you've got those poll ratings, being able to be in the debates on telly and being treated as an equal and not as an also-ran. That just changes the dynamic. And again, it's like the first past the post voting thing. You get to a tipping point where it's no longer a sort of a deep, dark secret. I was with friends at the weekend, and massive big falling out because he's a massive Reform voter. She's very much on the left, but it's a really, really big. It's you know, it's Brexit levels of personal for a lot of families now.
Yeah, well, there is nothing as powerful in politics as power, and Nigel Farage has got it. And the hugest problem here is for the Tory party, because the Tory party, I mean, I began my career at the Conservative Party in this anti-UKIP unit more than 10 years ago, back when they really were a small party. And all the way back then, the number one message the Conservative Party used is, you might like them, they might be right, but they can't win. They're not going to get that. You're just going to be splitting our vote. You're going to be letting Labour win. It doesn't
work anymore.
It doesn't work anymore because in many parts of the country, Reform are entirely entitled, in my view, to turn around. And when we got these big MRP polls, to do it on this local level and say, look, no, round here, if you vote Conservative, you're splitting the vote. And that is an incredibly powerful political message.
We are into such fascinating times. I mean, but again, for me, it's just one of those simple things that, like, you know, I've never declared for any party and never will when I'm on there. But it just, I've always said, you know, as I vote, I'm a floating voter. I vote on the policies and the people, and I'm in the lucky position often to be able to meet the people and make a personal judgment. And when people just stick to whatever party it is, whichever political hue want, you know, totally no matter what, you're not going to get your views represented because they don't have to worry. They care about the floating voters. Those are the people who make the decisions. In terms of, I mean, you know, the plan to tackle migration, legal migration. We've got the issue of smashing the gangs. I mean, we've just got huge numbers of people coming from abroad, coming over the channel. You know, it will be record after record after record. We've got beautiful weather this weekend, beautiful weather coming up this week. No doubt we'll see, you know, probably a couple of thousand plus more coming just this time. We're already, 42% over where we were last year. No smashing of the gangs, tackling legal migration. And on legal migration, we're into just, I mean, absurd territory of just sort of, we're going to try and tackle the number of students who stay on and work at Burger King. Doesn't touch the size of the issue. And at the same time, over the weekend, dealing with illegal migration, Serco, one of the 3 private contractors working for the Home Office, offering landlords 5-year guaranteed full rent deals to house asylum seekers at the taxpayers' expense. They've already got, I think, 30,000 asylum seekers living in these private homes. They basically say, we'll pay the rent guaranteed, we'll pay any repairs, property management, utilities and council tax bills for these. So when they are paying it, they're taking a massive profit, paid for by the government. Government doesn't have any money apart from ours. We are paying for this. And by the way, they're renting these properties at double the cost of what the local rents are. How on earth are local families expecting to compete?
And then we see the gall of Sir Keir Starmer, this country's Prime Minister, to come out today with balderdash, mendacious tissue of lies to say that he's going to fix this problem. It's as much of a lie as when he turned around and he said he was going to smash the gangs. He had no intention of doing that. He's got no intention of fixing this problem. He's perfectly happy to perpetuate a system that is perfectly good and fine for people in Westminster, but is devastating for communities up and down this country, traditional towns that have seen their local hotels taken over by gangs that maraud around, making everybody feel uncomfortable. It doesn't affect people around here. It affects people that work hard, that pay their taxes, that do the right thing. And I am fed up. I am sick to the back teeth of politicians that think they can come out 2 weeks before an election and lie again. We aren't going to take it anymore.
But this time we mean it. This time. But that's the thing. Look, I mean, I want to just get in before we go to a break, because I'm asking the question about this, and I know I've got calls coming in on this, but you know, you're always welcome to get in touch on all the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000, so the local elections, but also again these latest promises on migrants, but also teachers, nurses, and other public sector workers should be given pay rises of up to 4%. That's according to independent pay review bodies. It would be funded, of course, by spending cuts in different departments. You'll have to have these so-called efficiency savings that we never actually see. money. Every government promises that, and then you cut. So you cut a load of there's spending on other things to pay for those pay rises. Bearing in mind, in education, 80% of the school's budget is teachers' pay. So you are looking at squeezing an awful lot of other things. They're looking at close to 4% pay rise, according to their pay review body, and on of almost 1.4%. Well, sorry, apologies for 1.4 million NHS workers, the recommended pay rise is closer to about 3%. But basically, there isn't the money in the budget, under Rachel Reeves' budgets for these departments, to pay for that. Well, at that point, do our taxes go up? Do they have to borrow more? Do they agree to these pay rises? If they don't agree to these pay rises, we're looking at more strikes, more parents having their lives disrupted, their kids' education disrupted by teachers' strikes, people's operations and treatments being delayed. We've seen people will have lost lives during those NHS strikes we've seen so far. We've also got a massive retention and recruitment problem both in the NHS and in education. They can't get people to stay, they can't get people to come and do those jobs. Surely a pay rise in this scenario is the right answer, Sam.
But Julia, there's no money left, right? There is no money left. The government has spent everything it's got and more, which is why it's so deep into borrowing. It has raised taxes as much as it humanly can. We're at a stage in which farmers have been absolutely squeezed to the stage of just absolute distraughtness by this government, a vast degree. The businesses have had more taxes paid on every single worker. There are no taxes left
you
to
can't
put
squeeze
up.
the pips are squeezed enough.
Something has got to give. Now there are obvious.
What is it that should give though?
Number one thing that could absolutely be cut that would make serious money is welfare spending in this country.
Yeah.
And yet this government is not prepared, and by the way, neither was the last government, despite it being a Conservative government, to do what is necessary.
They were making a good fist of it up to 2019. 2020 it just went absolutely mad. Then they let it carry on being mad.
They were asleep at the wheel, totally and utterly. It was one of the biggest failures of the Conservative Party in that time, was the explosion in that. And now you have millions of people that have got into the habit of being signed off from work for mental health problems that are being exacerbated by sitting at home. We are paying people to get sicker in this country. And unless politicians are prepared to deal with the hard stuff to sort that out, there's not going to be any money left. There isn't any money left to pay doctors, more nurses, more. That's the reality.
And the tinkering around the edges here and there isn't going to fly. We are looking at needing tens of billions in cuts, full stop. We need to go full Doge style, if you ask me, but there we are. I just don't think anyone should be paying to paint rainbow flags on zebra crossings. I reckon the average person, anyone working here, anyone listening or watching this, could go into any local council, any government department, you could see what's spent on various things and just literally go, no, you wouldn't have to cut a single vital service. You just get rid of an absolute load of absolute nonsense. No issue at all. Your thoughts on that? Very welcome, of course. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get your calls and your messages up next. This is Talk.
you know, our outcomes on this speak for themselves. You know, this is not you and I, Mike, or our listeners being party political. Just look at the outcomes relative to other developed countries, and our cancer outcomes, I'm afraid, are not good at all. And a lot of that is down to delays in diagnosis, and we're still experiencing a hangover from the total capitulation of the NHS to COVID as well at this point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 03444 499 1000 is the number to call to get in touch about all the topics we're talking about. You can also text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Well, I couldn't remember whether I'd said that or not earlier. Need to say it once an hour. But you're getting in touch particularly about, on text and tweet, about public sector pay rises of up to 4%. That's what independent pay review bodies have said, be funded by either spending cuts or tax rises, or we could see more strike threats in crucial public services. What's your reaction to that? Well, David says, when they support British values and not the woke trans lobby, then maybe we should consider a pay rise. Until then, they get nothing. I have to say, it's not your average nurse who gets a choice over what the NHS does in terms of changing rooms. And we'll talk more about that, by the way, later in the show, because it's absolutely extraordinary how many public bodies and charities are saying, oh no, we're going to defy the Supreme Court ruling on women's single-sex spaces. Well, good luck with that, guys. Carla says, so they want to hurt the people even more because they can't budget their money. Ivan says, another example of how the NHS is not fit for purpose. The unions will never be satisfied. And Rachel says, give the unions an inch, they will take a mile and bankrupt the country. Oscar says something which I know Sam Armstrong will like. The problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. And let's go on the line to Helen. She's on the line from Somerset. Helen, you want to talk about NHS pay rises. What do you want to say?
Well, one thing that people don't seem to... Oh, by the way, it's my first time calling in.
Oh, is it? Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Oh, it's taken a lot of gumption, and please play nicely.
Well, we'll see.
Basically, when we keep talking about nurses' pay rises and all the rest of it, yeah, that's great. But back about 2015-ish, all the nurses were put in with the rest of the NHS staff on agenda for change. So therefore, like the other day when the nurses went out on strike and got their, I don't know, was it 5% or whatever in the end? Of the
can't remember what they got in the end, but I think it was around that.
The whole of the NHS basically got it. You're not able to target nurses and pay them appropriately and tempt people into the profession unless you put them on a different pay scale.
Yeah, that's it. Now, do you have experience? Have you ever worked in the NHS?
Yes, I am a qualified nurse.
Right, and are you still working?
But yes, I don't work in the NHS, so I left that years ago.
Oh, right, so you're one of those many nurses who've got qualified, you worked in the NHS, when I'm done with this, and you work as a nurse, in the private sector, or?
I have my own business.
Oh, right. OK, cool. Well, I mean, just had enough. I mean, but this thing, it is, I mean, so do you think there is an argument for nurses to be paid more? Well, my thing is, like, in any other sector, if you need waitresses for your restaurant and you can't get anybody, and you'd put the wages up, first of all, as the first way of getting someone to come and do the job. It seems to me if that's what we have to do to get enough staff in. But as you're saying, that the problem is we then have to pay all the backroom people the same extra money.
Yes, years ago at British Airways, there was a chap called Rod Eddington. He came in as the new chief executive. And what he did was he took out like whole bandings and he got some to act up and some to act down, and that's how he attacked it with the backroom staff, if you like. He didn't cut back on the frontroom staff. That's how he did it. Yeah. It was a very good system. It worked. Yeah. But you'll never get... The thing is, as well, as a nurse, anyone goes into nursing, you try to do good in the world. You do. Yeah. You don't expect to be living in poverty. You expect to be able to pay your basic bills. You may not
nurses have seen a real terms pay fall. I mean, a lot of people have in the private sector as well.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that. But at the end of the day, you're talking frontline, whether or not you want your life saved or not, whether or not, you know, it is critical. You are literally paying someone to have the decision whether or not to pull the crash bell and to resuscitate you.
Yeah.
That is, at the end of the day, your nearest and dearest. I mean, it doesn't get more brutal than that. It is a brutal profession. But nurses don't expect to be overly paid. We don't expect a luxury lifestyle. But given the fact that rents have gone up and that bills have gone up, I mean, nurses shouldn't be going to food banks, no. But until they actually...
Although we're always told about these mythical nurses going to food banks, but if one nurse had to go to a food bank, every nurse would have to go to a food bank, and they're not.
Not necessarily, because you do get nurses whose husbands, for example, or partners earn a good wage as a household income. But certainly to be a single nurse, I'd say, you know, with a single parent, yes, you would have to claim benefits.
Well, I mean, again, a very good close family member of mine is a nurse who's a single parent. She's never had to claim benefits.
Well, I mean, I don't know a person.
No, I'm just saying. I don't really. I mean, in terms of what nurses work now, there's no reason they're on. No reason why they shouldn't be able to pay their way.
About my own experience. I worked out of London, for example, because every year the rail ticket used to go up, and that just used to wipe out any, you know, and then the rent would go up on top. So every year, we're certainly working and living in London.
I mean, a lot of people, but certainly, I mean, again, I completely accept that people are struggling, absolutely, and on those wages, you know, and again, people have, you know, when we saw inflation of over 11%, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, people and the private sector as well saw their real terms incomes cut, and the question is, you know, if we need to have these nurses, I think most people are very surprised. I'd be like, well, if we need to pay them more, we need to pay them more. I just don't know why we have to pay anyone in the backroom offices more to get them. I'm pretty sure we could manage without a lot of them. Helen, so appreciate your call. I hope you'll call in again. Really, really great to hear from you. Let's go to Daniel, who's in Epsom, who's definitely not a first-time caller. Good morning to you, Daniel.
No, I'm not, unfortunately. Morning. I just want to say, everyone's talking about Kemi and what Kemi has to say. And I have to be honest, it doesn't really matter what she has to say, because in a year or two, she's not going to be there. I mean, the reality is whatever it is, Kemi doesn't have it. And
I mean, she did a stonkingly good PMQs last week, and she was actually on fire, I thought, and something she was very passionate about. But I agree with you, she hasn't. The polls are very clear. She hasn't set, you know, the country. People haven't gone, oh right, Kemi's in charge. Right, now I'll come back to the Conservatives after giving them a trouncing last July.
Yeah, but there's a really clear reason for that, and it's not really down to Kemi. It's that the electorate, most of us, realised that we had 14 years in which we told the Conservative Party, particularly on immigration, we gave them really explicit instructions to stop illegal immigration and to cut legal immigration down to extremely low numbers, and they ignored us, right? And then half of their party, the Consocialists, the centrists, the avocado on toast types, the weaklings, right? Half of their party are still there in situ.
Yeah.
Okay, and they haven't done anything about it. They haven't worked out, why did we lose? Oh yeah, half of our party were inactive Consocialist weaklings. Now, first thing we need to do to get back into power is get rid of those, but they haven't. They've left them there. The most outstanding candidate to be leader is Rob Jenrick, and they didn't choose him. They make a cacophony of terrible decisions. They can't ever. Whoever runs the Conservative Party, the 1922 committee, they might as well go on holiday, because they've got no clarity in what they're doing. They've got a lack of identity. That's why when I hear Nigel speak, I know that he has integrity. I know he means what he says.
It's being, I suppose, for a lot of people, it's about when people are authentic, because if you judge people based on what they've done over the years and whether their words and their actions match up, that's not the case, certainly for Labour and the Tories on this crucial immigration issue, is it? Daniel, great call. As always, great to hear from you. Do give a call if you want to have your say on any of the topics we're talking about, 0344 499 1000. I have to say, young Sam Armstrong smiling away wryly at that.
Well, look, I think what you're seeing very clearly is that Tory voters, people like Daniel, people who used to vote Conservative, are as of yet not persuaded, as Kemi has said. Look, she thinks she's got to go a long way to bring people's trust back. The trouble she's got is elections are coming now, and you're going to get built in a sense that this just isn't going quite as well as you would like it to.
It's going to be very interesting. I've often said that about local elections, that's for sure. 11:34 is the time. Up next, going to talk about, we're going to finally get that bonfire of the Quangos, as it's discovered that huge number, 350 Quango bosses and chiefs are being paid more than the Prime Minister, who's on 172k a year. We're also going to be talking about, is there hope for a Ukraine peace deal? Is actually a peace deal, not a surrender deal, after Donald Trump sat down for that one-on-one with Zelensky ahead of the Pope's funeral at the weekend. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back. This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:37 is the time. Let's talk right now to Elliot Keck. He's head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Very good morning to you, Elliot.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. We're talking to your alliance an awful lot at the moment, doing some stonkingly good work in terms of exposing just the outrageous cost of all of these sort of just the things that government and central government, local government and everyone else is spending with your and my, everyone's taxpayer hard-earned money on people and projects which lots of people just simply go, I didn't know that existed, it shouldn't exist, and I don't know why it costs that much. This time it's Quango bosses, and you found more than 350. Some of them aren't even the boss, they're actually just like number 2 or 3 working in these huge number of Quangos who are paid more than the Prime Minister gets paid, and he gets 172 grand a year. Tell us who these people are. What do they actually do for a living?
Well, they're responsible, many of them, for delivering some very important public services, an important area of policy. Some of them, unfortunately, are responsible for funding the absolute guff that we see time and time again from central government. And one of the things that people vote for when they vote in general elections is for change and for ministers that are able to enact that democratic mandate. But Labour ministers that have come in since the election have found that when they're pulling levers, nothing is actually happening, and that's because so much of this power has devolved to this massive body of Quangocrats.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I was amazed to discover, isn't it almost 4,000 different Quangos?
I think it's about 400 different Quangos.
400?
They have 1,472 with pay packets, pay deals over £100,000, 315 paid more than the Prime Minister. Let's take NHS England, right, which Wes Streeting is abolishing. Wes Streeting has these big radical reforms to the NHS that he's planning. He's actually finding that NHS England is standing in the way of that. And the boss of NHS England, now outgoing boss, the recently departed boss, she got paid £267,000 in the data set that we looked at. If you want evidence that there are people, frankly, more powerful than ministers, then you only have to look at their salaries as symbolic evidence of that.
Yeah, and we've got the new guy who's caught napping while watching Netflix at 3 p.m. on the way back from a meeting in London because he's working from home a lot of the time as well. Quite bizarre. But this is the thing. It's not only the fact that these people are largely, well, they're unelected, they're unaccountable to us, they largely would appear unaccountable to the government as well. And we saw that. We did the Sentencing Council in recent years. It's the fact that we're paying their wages. And you often wonder in these cases, well, but what are we paying them to actually do? You said there are some that do very important work, but most of us would prefer they were more accountable to us. But there are an awful lot of Quangos and things where you're sort of not quite sure what they do. And could we manage perfectly well without them? I mean, Doge style in America, as Elon Musk has covered, actually an awful lot of people could be got rid of and no one will notice.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are a lot of Quangos that probably we do need what they provide, but it should be brought in-house so that there's actually ministerial accountability. Ministers can actually go up to desks and demand why, you know, things aren't happening and why improvements aren't being made. But there's a lot, let's take the Climate Change Committee or maybe the Arts Council, that are just spending all of their time lecturing the public, funding absolutely pointless, wasteful grants. So there's probably a couple of ways you can look at Quangos, but even the ones that are providing important services, I still think we need to look at bringing them in-house so ministers can actually demand, you know, that they bring in the change that they've promised voters.
But we're often told that these people need to be paid big salaries because you're competing with the private sector. And we've had that argument about the fat cat bosses of local councils for many years, but often these people are actually paid far more than people doing this sort of work in the private sector.
Oh, that's right. For 80% of people in the public sector, they're paid more than people in the private sector. It's only right at the top that the private sector pay starts to improve relative to public sector.
And those are largely for massively, you know, talented individuals who can basically take over, you know, a major high street chain and turn it around in a year and produce profits. You know, they're paid basically to do what they do well.
And they're in extremely high-risk jobs where if they don't perform, they get kicked out. You know, whereas in the public sector, you have excellent job security, you have way better benefits. You look at things like annual leave or sick leave. You have an incredible pension deal. So, you know, actually, if you just look at salaries, you know, things can be a bit distorted. When in the public sector, there's quite a range of benefits that you simply don't get in the private sector.
That is a key thing. What do you make of the discussion about pay review bodies for the likes of, you know, teachers, nurses, and other public sector workers? We're told that the independent pay review bodies have suggested up to 4% for teachers, around the 3% mark for nurses and other NHS staff. But basically, you know, if we don't pay it, the unions will go on strike. If it is paid, it's going to have to come out of the budgets, existing budget, say for schools, or existing budget for the NHS. That will mean spending cuts elsewhere, or tax rises, or more borrowing. What do you make of those pay review body suggestions?
It's a really interesting one, and I listened with great interest to your conversation before the break. I mean, the thing, and again, it comes back to pensions. So yes, public sector workers have seen their pay reduced slightly in real terms since 2010. But when you include their pension contributions, their pay has actually gone up in real terms. And that's not the case in the private sector. So I think one of the things we need to look at is massively reforming it so that the pension contributions are far more in line with the private sector. And then you can actually use those savings to put, you know, frontline pay, you know, the pay that they actually see in their pay pack at the end of the month rather than having to wait for 20, 30, 40
And that
years.
was one of the issues with doctors, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
That actually they're getting, I mean, a huge percentage of their salary, equivalent salary, is paid on top of their salary by the NHS, i.e. us, into their pension.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's probably one area I'd look at. I think if you substantially reformed the pension system so that it was much fairer to taxpayers, you probably could actually afford some of the pay rises that frontline workers who, you know, everybody rightly has sympathy with and does, you know, a lot of them do incredibly important work. I mean, you know, you might actually be able to afford to pay them a little bit more in terms of their, you know, monthly pay packet that they see at the end of every month.
Yeah, and again, also, you do have the situation, don't you, where, and we had a caller just a few moments ago, a nurse, I think
think it was Helen, that actually you've got a situation where because these pay bodies, these pay bands and things, everyone's kind of lumped in together. And when you've got a recruitment problem for certain key workers on the front line, you then and you want to pay more to recruit or retain them, you're having to pay other people. And again, the huge amount of waste that goes on, not just in the NHS, in local councils and elsewhere, just a huge number of people who are supposedly just sort of doing these backroom jobs. And we've got this amazing story we're going to talk about later in the show, but these polygamous workers, those who are working from home, and you've done lots of research on council workers and others being allowed to work from home, and government departmental workers, but people working from home, but basically doing 2 or 3 different jobs at the same time, just sitting there on Zooms all day because they're doing absolutely nothing, and no one even notices.
Yeah, and worse than that, they're not just working from home. In findings that we released actually in the papers on Sunday, we find that hundreds of them are actually working from abroad. They're being allowed, let's take Ofgem, the energy regulator, which formally allows staff to work from abroad for 2 weeks a year. So if working from home is bad enough, many of them are working from the beach, I'm afraid.
I mean, I'd love to be able to get away with that, but even I can't. Elliot Kay, always good to talk to you, head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you for that. Sam Armstrong, to bring you back in on this. There is just a real feeling now, especially when people are really struggling. When times are good, people they can not that worried about what the people are doing. But when you know you're paying this massive whack in tax, and you are struggling to pay your rent or your mortgage, your heating bills, you're struggling to afford to run the car, you're struggling every single day, and then you see what's happening in the public sector, and in particular things not getting done. You've got people who complain about the wages, but they've got better deals than you've got, and you're not getting the public services you pay for. People understandably feel resentful.
Yeah. Everybody with eyes and ears can tell exactly what's going on. Yeah. You're not seeing these workers working multiple jobs in the private sector. You'll see them in the public sector.
I bet they are.
But why are they in the public sector? And they got to the extent now that they're having to call in the police to investigate it, right? And I'll tell you why they're having to bring in the police. It's because it's not obvious who is and isn't working multiple jobs. Yeah. Because the requirements for people are so low that it is entirely possible to work 3 full-time jobs and not get caught for years.
It's just amazing. This is my thing, is that if no one notices when you're on holiday, if someone doesn't have to do your job when you're on holiday, you don't have to work extra hard before and after to get that work done you would have otherwise got done, maybe your job doesn't need to be done.
But these stats, these individual practices are borne out in the statistics. Yeah. Public sector productivity has not improved since the year 2000.
Yeah. Despite all the technology.
Since the time before computers and emails, they're still as efficient as when they were having to lick stamps and envelopes to send messages around the place. And that is reflective of the fact that so many of them are taking the Michael. They're doing it at our expense, and then when they don't get the pay rise, they go on strike. They bring everybody that is trying to work hard to a standstill.
That's what Sam Armstrong reckons. What do you reckon? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Up next, we're going to be talking about, is there now hope for a ceasefire deal, a peace deal in Ukraine, which actually is a peace deal, not a surrender deal, as Donald Trump was previously looking at after that one-on-one meeting between Zelensky and Trump ahead of the Pope's funeral in the Vatican at the weekend. We'll talk about that up next with Andrew Fox, the defence and military analyst. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Now imagine that the Conservatives, as is probable, are your only option for getting into power, right? They're there, they've got enough councillors along with you. Are you going to just turn that down? Because Nigel Farage has said so. Are all of them going to turn it down? So I think this is where Nigel's command and control culture, which, you know, he's a superstar, he's the reason this party exists, but there does seem to be a tension often in his parties between his need to decide everything from the centre and the need to attract people into politics who can make his parties into bigger institutions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Get your thoughts on what our next guest has to say. Let's talk about Ukraine. Very much in the news, front page of the papers a lot of the weekend was this extraordinary meeting, one-on-one. I mean, looked very staged, it had to be said, in front of the cameras. But with Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky sitting one-on-one, heads close together, talking about Ukraine. And hopeful words being given by both of them after the fact. This is all before the Pope's funeral at the Vatican, but how hopeful are we that Donald Trump has finally realised that, yes, as he said, he's being played by Vladimir Putin. Let's talk to Andrew Fox about this. He's a defence and military analyst. A very good morning to you, Andrew.
Yeah, morning, Julia.
How hopeful are you that we may get something akin to a proper peace deal with security guarantees for Ukraine that isn't the surrender deal that so far the Donald Trump White House has been pushing for?
Well, pretty low, in all honesty. We've not really heard any noise out of the White House that suggests they might have substantially changed their position on this. We can see these sort of performative pieces that are coming out over the last few days with the staged Vatican meeting and Mr. Trump. You know, you can never trust a word that comes from him, quite frankly, because the actual hard yards here will be being done by diplomats behind the scenes. And that doesn't really give us any detail. So I'm pretty low on expectation that we'll see any huge changes off the back of this.
I mean, there's no doubt at all, you know, that meeting, the two men sitting in this huge room, you know, just one-on-one, there's two chairs. It was obviously staged, but certainly better relations between those two men has got to be a good thing. We know there's that personal animosity dates all the way back to Donald Trump's first term when he was trying to get Zelensky, the new president then of Ukraine, to basically help him out with some info about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and to help him in his own election. But so we know this is a personal animosity there, but even the words that we've had from Donald Trump talking about how, you know, he seems to be getting to grips with the idea that Putin is kind of playing him along. He's accused the despot of stringing him along over Ukraine peace talks. Is that not, that change of tone, is that not a good optimistic sign?
Yeah, of course, it's an advance. It's better than where we were a month or 2 months ago. And the sooner America wakes up to the extent to which they've been played by Vladimir Putin, then that's only a good thing. But, you know, there's an awful lot of wheels within wheels on the American side here, particularly with the fact that Steve Witkoff is the one leading these negotiations across multiple arenas. Any one person would have difficulties dealing with Russia or Iran or Hamas, and yet he's doing all three at once. And so when we...
And keeping up his golf handicap as well.
Of course, you know, and priorities are important. But the key thing here is there is so much going on behind the scenes that we have absolutely no visibility of. We know that Mr. Zelensky hasn't yet signed the minerals deal, that appalling deal that was presented to him as fait accompli. We know that the last details we had of any peace deal were hugely loaded in favour of Russia and against Ukraine. And I've not seen anything substantive that changes that yet. Although, as you say, the mood music has made a difference, and hopefully it'll make a substantive difference in due course.
Well, especially, I mean, look, we know that this has all been directed out of the White House and Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff, not by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But we know he was pretty sound on Ukraine ahead of his appointment. So whether or not there are people behind the scenes who are trying to sort of push Donald Trump into perhaps a more sensible position on this, one that European leaders, we saw there was a huddle at one point, it was Trump, Macron and Starmer and Zelensky, that they're trying to sort of push this as well. There's quite a lot of people into it. Of course, then we do know that the US president still has J.D. Vance in his ear, and J.D. Vance has been very, very negative about Zelensky in Ukraine.
Yeah, and we also have to remember, of course, that Ukraine is just one piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's a much bigger puzzle.
Yeah.
There is very clear indications that China is the main and overriding focus of American foreign policy under this administration. It looks as if, to be generous, the way they've approached Ukraine is an attempt to cleave Moscow away from Beijing.
Yeah.
And if that remains their overarching grand strategic goal, I can't see them changing on that hugely.
Although the thing I don't understand is if you want to give a clear signal to China about, the threat to Taiwan and elsewhere, the signal should be don't mess with us because they're taking on Russia. That would be a much clearer signal. What did you make of Putin's decision? Because he would have overseen this. They're in the middle of these these talks supposedly, although they're not talks. He's just basically saying, I want the whole of Ukraine. I want the right to take the whole of Ukraine. I mean, it is. I genuinely, I think this would be an absolute humiliation for America if that deal ever went through. It's an absolute surrender. It's an embarrassment to America and to Donald Trump that he would even consider it. But what do you think Putin was thinking with those bombing attacks on civilians in Kyiv over the last week or so? I mean, why would he think that was a good idea? Because Donald Trump then criticised it. Donald Trump has played this game that Putin is somehow this strange victim in all of this, just a man trying to get peace, and that Zelensky is the problem. But when Putin approves, which he would have done, this attack on Kyiv, that rather undermines that. Why would he have done something so, strategically dumb?
Well, two reasons. I think first of all is that he knows he can, and he's seen an opportunity now as America has put pressure on Ukraine. That opportunity has arisen to double down on military activity because he thinks he can get away with it, and it seems that he has. I mean,
but there's no strategic benefit to him killing some civilians in Kyiv. It's the strategic harm, isn't it?
It's terror tactics. It's designed to demoralise Ukrainian civilians so that they lose support for the war. And that's a fairly well-established, if very, very illegal tactic. Mm-hmm. So it's state terrorism, quite clearly. But look at the rhetoric that came out of the White House after that attack. Whereas he's been hammering Zelensky for not wearing a suit, and personally launching into him. His response to Putin was to go on Truth Social and post something along the lines of, "Oh, Vladimir, stop!" It was pathetic.
Yeah.
And the marked difference in rhetoric when it comes to the fact that one has not worn a suit and the other has murdered civilians.
Yeah.
Is probably what gives me the most concern.
Absolutely.
Over the last week.
I don't know if your palm tree decorated shirt today would have passed muster in the White House either there, Andrew. Andrew Fox, Defence Military Analyst, thank you for joining us. Sam Armstrong, were you hopeful when you saw the pictures of that conversation between Zelensky and Trump in the Vatican?
I was, and that's because Donald Trump doesn't approach diplomacy like normal people. With normal people, actually, personal feelings kind of make some difference, but actually the officials are the ones that make a difference. With Trump, everything's different, actually. It's all personal for Donald Trump. And, I think nobody could fail to be impressed, even if you're president of the United States, sitting in the Vatican, these grand halls that have been there for 1,000 years, seen the greatest events of human history, sit there to do the deal yourself, press the flesh. I thought that was a big moment. I thought his criticisms of Vladimir Putin were a big moment. And look, maybe, just maybe, and I say this as somebody who probably would have voted for Donald Trump, someone who's been very, very concerned about what's going on with Ukraine, maybe we're beginning to see some sort of more sense from the president on this issue.
That was always my thing, that how can he not see that Putin is playing him? I mean, surely enough people are now saying, oh, for goodness sake, I mean, you're looking like an idiot. And again, this is not Trump derangement syndrome. To play the sort of poor Putin, I mean, he genuinely talks about him as if he's his mate. He's like, he's not. He's a KGB man playing you. I was just very, very hopeful when I saw that. But then it is clearly staged, and it's clearly there to send out a message. The question is how strong will he be? And as you say, if he's taking things on personal issues as opposed to strategic national interests and Western interests, then things won't change.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think what Donald Trump needs to recognise is if you want to be tough on China, if you want to stand up to China, the best way you can send a message to China not to invade Taiwan, which is the big thing coming down the line, really threatens world peace, is you have to hold the line everywhere.
Absolutely. It's so clear, isn't it? And again, he was so critical of Obama on his red line in Syria for the same reason. So much more coming up after midday. We're going to take a quick news break. Then we're going to talk to Brendan O'Neill about all things political and cultural. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you so much for your company. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's great to have your company. Lots more to talk about. Coming up in just a couple of moments, we're going to be talking to Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer at Spiked Online. Get his thoughts on a lot of the biggest stories of the day. I do want to hear from you as well on all of the big topics we're talking about, including Keir Starmer unveiling a crackdown on immigration. It's going to come after this week's local elections on Thursday. Plans to bring down legal immigration. This comes as Reform UK is expected to win hundreds of seats, possibly even the Runcorn by-election. Plus, hundreds of public officials paid more than the Prime Minister last year, sparking calls for Labour to speed up its promised bonfire of the Quangos. More than 350 Quango bosses and other chiefs receiving a higher taxpayer-paid salary than the £172,000 that Keir Starmer gets. Plus, the NHS is now set to test all children who believe they are transgender for autism. This is under new guidance to be introduced in the wake of the Cass review, because a huge percentage of the kids who claim to be transgender are actually on the autistic spectrum. Large number of them are also gay. which is why, for some reason, they think they've been possibly born in the wrong body. Plus, police and employers are cracking down on staff secretly working numerous full-time jobs from home after a rise in what's called polygamous working. But how come people are able to not realise that they're not actually doing a full-time job? Oh, I wonder. We'll talk about that all coming up. Do get in touch. Love to hear your thoughts on any of those topics, but also about the possibility of public sector pay rises, particularly for teachers and nurses, of up to 4%. That's what the independent pay review bodies for those those workers have suggested. However, that is a lot more than Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has budgeted for, in which case they're going to have to be, well, spending cuts because those departmental budgets can't rise. And by the way, this would be a big rise every year for years to come. But will they have to make spending cuts and cuts on services? Are we talking about taxes going up, or maybe more borrowing going up? Is that even possible? Or could we see the possibility of more strikes in our hospitals and schools? I'd love to know your reaction. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Sam Armstrong is still with us, and I can't wait to get your response to what my next guest has to say. Brendan O'Neill, as I say, is chief political writer at Spiked Online and joins us now. A very, very good afternoon to you, Brendan.
Hi, Julia. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I don't even know where to start. There's so much to talk to you about. But let's talk, first of all, local elections. We've got this story that's been planted. You can always tell as a political journalist what stories have been planted here or there. This one's in the Telegraph, for the Tory voters who maybe are going to reform, because that paper's been quite pro-reform in recent years. And basically it's saying, oh, look, we're going to be looking at these new controls on legal migration, because, my goodness me, smashing the gangs for the illegal migrants has gone so well so far. But the idea is that people who come over on a student visa, not able to then just transfer to a work visa, but then work in a very low paid job, whether it's in a care home, very worthwhile work, or working doing the washing up in a restaurant, that they won't be able to transfer onto those visas because they basically won't be economically contributing to this country. Do you think that's going to be enough to try and fight the threat from reform?
No, I don't think it is, actually, because, every time the government and the Tory party, in fact, talks about this issue, they come up with very technical solutions. So they say, we'll change this visa system, we'll do something with France, we'll erect a gate in Calais and maybe people won't get over the gate. It's all these small technical gestures, I would say, to try to show that they're serious about stopping this issue. But there's a more fundamental underlying moral and political problem, which is that we are governed by a political class that doesn't really believe in borders at all, which doesn't think that nationhood is something worth preserving, which thinks you're a bit of a xenophobe if you go on about sovereignty and things like that. Yeah. So there's a deeper underlying issue, and I don't think people will be fooled by these crumbs from the table that are coming just before the local elections.
I mean, this is the thing for an awful lot of voters, whether it's Labour or whether it's the Conservatives, and the only two parties have been in power in recent years. People just simply don't trust anything they say, because when they get into office, they tend not to do the things they said they would do.
Exactly, especially on the question of immigration. Both parties have promised to get immigration under control, and they have both catastrophically failed. If you go outside of London, Julia, you'll know this, and so many of your listeners will know this. There'll be people up and down the country listening to this show. People outside of London, especially in working class areas, especially in traditionally Labour areas, they're really, really angry about the immigration issue. They are not racist. They are not xenophobic. These are just people who don't understand why their cost of living is going through the roof, why they can't have a winter fuel allowance, why their energy costs are uncontrollable, and yet we seem to have enough resources to pay for people to stay in hotels, to rent houses, to come here and get certain benefits. They don't understand that system. They think it's unfair and cruel.
And it's very clear that a lot of politicians, and I think a lot of the media class, and I think a lot of the civil service class, simply don't understand the impact that has. And again, when you're talking about things like putting, large groups of young men who've arrived in the country from very different cultures, North Africa, Middle East, and others, and you put a load of them in a house or in a hostel or in a hotel in a small village, a small town, the impact that that has on local people, particularly on young women. It's been a very big issue in terms of the rise in sexual assaults and violent threats and things and the intimidation that women have felt. But then even when they're in hostels, again, we've got lots of people living in lots of lovely little leafy villages saying they can't sell their homes because they've got a load of migrant hostels nearby, and people go, well, I don't want to come and buy my home here. I don't want to live there like that. But at the same time, we've got the extraordinary revelation that Serco, one of 3 private contractors working for the Home Office, they're now offering landlords 5-year guaranteed full rent deals to house asylum seekers at taxpayer expense. Yeah, it's cheaper for the taxpayer than keeping them in even the cheapest hotels. However, we're looking at rents which are double the local rental guidance. So no family, no single person could compete with those government contracts, but they're offering to pay not only for the rent, but also repair and maintenance, free property management, utilities, council tax bills, you name it. Guess who's paying for all of it? Us mugs, and at the same time, private rents are going up for the people living there nearby because of the competition. Because what idiot landlord wouldn't rent out guaranteed income for 5 years at double the rent rather than to families, for 6 months at a time? I mean, but again, this doesn't impact the people making these decisions because they're all homeowners in lovely leafy streets in London.
Exactly right. And they are people who, when they encounter an immigrant, it tends to be an au pair who helps to look after their children,
yes,
or
completely.
the person who serves them their £5 coffee in the morning. I mean, that sounds like a caricature, but it's true.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that there is a class of people in this country who benefit from cheap labour coming here. That is the rich people, the people who own big corporations and the people who have nice, comfortable lives.
Yeah.
And there's another section of society that lose out when cheap labour comes here, and that is working class people, people in left behind communities. So this is a really important economic and moral question that none of our rulers is capable of getting to grips with. The thing is, what this means, essentially, let's boil it down. When people go to work now, they're not just working for themselves and their family and, of course, to pay for the upkeep of society. They're also working to keep immigrants in this country, to keep them in a relatively nice life. So people are now going to work for that reason, as well as for the normal reasons. That is going to really infuriate a lot of people in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know one of the things I also wanted to ask you about was this more than 1,300 Quango staff on salaries and benefits over £100,000 and 350 of them on salaries higher than the Prime Minister gets paid at 172 grand. That's including his MP salary. And you sort of wonder, who are these people? What else are their benefits? These, presumably these cushy jobs where they've got a great big pension as well, loads of other benefits, no worries about being uncertain in their job, whether or not they're going to lose their job at the end of the year, or no contracts and things. And a lot of people are just saying, we're done with this. We're just completely done with this.
Yeah, who are they and what are they doing? What are they doing that deserves so much money? If you look at some of these Quangos, a lot of them are just doing things that actually impact really negatively on ordinary people. If you look at a climate change Quango, for example, they will be the kind of people who say, well, you can't build that road, you can't have that coal-fired station, you can't create those new jobs. So these are people who get paid incredibly well to lord it over the rest of us. It's almost like a new system of feudalism. And
the sentencing guidelines, and again, unelected, unaccountable, and again, and it's just an excuse for governments to say, oh, it's not our problem. They did the same with the EU. Oh, it wasn't us, Gov, it was someone else. Now, the thing is about all of this is people have had enough. People are struggling on their wages right now. And we talk about, what goes on. We've got local elections coming up. We've also got, obviously, next gen election is probably 4 years away now. Reform riding high in the polls. There's lots of talk about whether the right-wing parties, Reform and Tories, should unite to try and take on Labour and indeed, Labour, the Greens, Liberal Democrats. We were talking to pollster Robert Hayward earlier, about how we have this sort of multi-party system now, a lot of different parties having a number of MPs having influence in the polls. What do you make of Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage both saying, we will not have any sort of electoral pact, however unofficial or official, ahead of the next general election, and basically, to hell with what happens as a result of that? What do you make of that?
You know, I'm slightly torn on this because on the one hand, I think it could be a missed opportunity because I think if they were to club together, they would certainly boot out this rubbish Labour government. There's no question about that. But on the other hand, we do need to shake up the two-party system. We really do. Both of these parties, and I include the Tories, of course, have been letting people down for decades, especially over the past 30 years. And I think shaking that up and having a multi-party system would be a really positive development for this country. So there's an argument for reform sticking out by themselves and saying, no, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to take over the two parties and we're going to create something new. So it's a kind of double-edged sword, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you want some kind of coalition to get rid of Labour. But on the other hand, I would like to see reform do better than both parties and prove that there is a different way to do politics in this country.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing for an awful lot of people. They'll have their allegiances this way or that. But one of the issues about particularly a first-past-the-post system is you have to get over a certain percentage to get a serious number of seats and have a chance of winning an election. We've seen reform, one of the latest big polls suggesting that actually they could be the biggest party in the next after the next general election on current polling. Again, week's a long time in politics, 4 years even longer. But even what we've seen in countries in Europe where they've got proportional representation, even where some parties seem to be on, the hard right, I mean, some being far right or hard right, being seen. I don't think of reform in any way as far right, and I don't think most voters do either. But actually, even when they've got a system where they've got proportional representation, even when some of those parties do win the majority of the seats, they've got the biggest party. The other parties, and we've seen this, in France, we've seen this in Germany, they will work together to basically keep that party out. Do you think that's likely? We could actually end up seeing even a Labour-Tory coalition to keep reform out?
I wouldn't put it past them, I have to say. I don't think Kemi Badenoch would do that, but who knows if some kind of, wet Tory were to take over in the future, you could easily see something like that happening. I mean, look at Ireland. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, traditionally the two opposing parties.
Arch enemies.
Yeah, they've formed a coalition because they like to be in power. Same thing in Germany as well. So, yes, that could easily happen. But I just think that this, putting a force field around populist parties, as we've seen in Europe, I don't think that's going to work much longer because eventually these parties are going to break through because they represent something that can't just be crushed, which is the anger of ordinary people at the elites that have been taking advantage of them, looking down their noses at them and treating them like an S word. That's what I was just thinking.
For the love of God, don't say anything I shouldn't.
That's what's been happening.
There's two more topics I want to get to, and I'm throwing these at you rather cruelly. But the BBC has just now published its independent review into BBC culture. We've had advances on it. Basically, they were concluding that there's no evidence of a toxic culture at the BBC. They spoke to some 2,500 employees and freelancers through one-on-one meetings, group discussions, a survey, written submissions about whether there were problems there. And they did identify there is a problem with some very senior people. Basically, if you're an on-air celeb and you're a big name, like Hugh Edwards, this was carried out in wake of him being found to have abused his position repeatedly, not just with a young man who he was asking to send him sexually explicit photographs and was paying him money, but also other young men working at the BBC as well, being harassed repeatedly again and again, and nothing being done about it. That actually there has been a problem there, and that they want to make people have better ways of dealing with that. But the idea that there isn't a toxic culture at the BBC, when that has been allowed to happen, numerous other cases over recent years and in the past, thinking Jimmy Savile and others, big names being able to get away with the most disgusting, awful, horrific, even criminal behaviour, when people have gone to bosses and said something about it, when we've got the outrageous behaviour over the issue of the trans issue, and again the absolute pushing of trans propaganda on our children and others, the pushing of climate change propaganda, European propaganda during Brexit, and now even the Gazan propaganda, pro-Palestinian propaganda, where once again, I mean, it's week after week, another outrage has happened where a BBC Arabic journalist has been talking about we'll burn the Jews like Hitler did. And this is just par for the course, and we all just go, that's just what the BBC is like. Is it reasonable for this review to suggest there isn't a toxic culture at the BBC?
I don't think it is. And I think both in terms of behaviour at the BBC behind the scenes and also in terms of what it puts out into the public realm politically and morally, I would say a lot of it is pretty toxic. And, you know, the BBC would be the first institution to slam the Catholic Church, for example, or sports institutions that had sexual abuse controversies. And both of those have had those controversies. And yet when it comes to putting its own house in order, lo and behold, it says, well, you know, we've made some mistakes, but we're not a toxic institution. It's letting itself off the hook. And I think your example of BBC Arabic, where the guy, they were relying on a journalist who had said that we will burn Jews like Hitler did. That is proof. If that's not proof of a toxic moral culture, I don't know what.
Yeah, and again, he said it publicly. He said things like that repeatedly, numerous different posts. It is quite extraordinary. But at the same time, by the way, the BBC will be very sort of big wagging their finger at people who've written stuff, you know, post the Southport attacks. They should absolutely go to prison. I just want to ask you just finally, you and I have discussed, you know, many, many times, you know, the issue of, you know, the Supreme Court ruling. And again, trans activists thinks it was about them. It wasn't. It was about women and the identity of women, our existence, the biological reality of women and our right to single-sex spaces and sports and things like that. It has been staggering to me, the number of people who are activists for the trans cause, who are basically saying they will defy this ruling, whether it comes to NHS hospitals, whether it comes to Girl Guiding UK. Pull your children out of Girl Guiding UK, people, because they're basically saying, we won't even tell parents, but we will allow a boy, a teenage boy who identifies as a girl, to share a room or a tent on a trip with a girl, and we won't even tell the girl's parents. I mean, stuff like this. This is blatantly in breach of the Supreme Court ruling, which established not only what the law is now, but that it has always been that case since 2010 under the Equality Act. Have you been surprised by how many organisations, not just the violent, aggressive, we're going to, you know, we on you trans activists, but how many organisations, public sector bodies, charities and others have said basically, we don't care what the Supreme Court says, we don't care what the law says, we're going to do what we're going to do?
I have been shocked, not surprised, but shocked. And what they really mean when they say we don't care what the court said, what they mean is we don't care about women. We don't care about women's privacy. We don't care about women's dignity. We don't care about women's rights. And when you hear trans activists in particular saying we're going to carry on as we always have, regardless of this court ruling, what they're saying is we will behave in a predatory way. Yeah. We will go into women's toilets even though we know they don't want us there. We will go into women's changing rooms and undress in front of women. Yep. We will carry on trying to use women-only domestic violence shelters or rape crisis centres. This is men threatening to barge into women-only areas. It is an orgy of misogyny disguised as a civil rights movement. And I think that's becoming a lot clearer to a lot more people.
I think one of the things that's really, really clear, though, is also, you know, when people talk about, yeah, OK, well, women's only spaces are women's only spaces, and people say there has to be a balance. No, that doesn't. No, that's not what the law says. Women get women's toilets, women's change rooms. Schools, after the age of 8, girls are entitled to a single-sex space, as are boys, to go to the toilet after the age of 11 to go to change. End of. And if it's a single-sex space, then someone of the opposite sex isn't allowed in. That is fact. That is the law. Nothing to discuss. If you're a parent and your kid doesn't have that, you know, tell them you're going to go to the lawyers. There are plenty of organisations that will help you. It's free money for the lawyers, no win, no fee stuff, because they'll guarantee to win on that. We've got to stamp this out. But what amazes me is there's sort of this obsession with going to the women's toilets. When you say, look, we'll provide in bigger companies or bigger public places, we'll provide a space that you can use as a trans person, whether it's the disabled toilet or whatever, but just a private space so you don't have to feel intimidated if you're identifying as a woman in the men's space, but you're also not intimidating women in the women's spaces. But a lot of these activists don't want that. It seems that they're much more concerned with being in women's spaces than protecting, apparently, their own safety and privacy.
Absolutely right, because this is about getting validation for their own identity. That's what it's about. As long as, and they want to use women almost as passive validators of their identity. So they have to have the right to go in women's spaces in their mind. But you know what? I keep seeing so-called trans women saying, where do we go to the bathroom now? Listen, go into the men's. I'm going to let you into a secret about men's bathrooms. We don't care who comes into them. It's not. It doesn't bother us one bit, and you'll be absolutely fine. Women have concerns, rightfully, and they don't want men in their bathrooms. Yeah. Men are much more relaxed. So just come in the men's, and it's fine.
Exactly. Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spectrum Online. Thank you very much indeed. Sam Armstrong's still with me now. We covered a lot of different ground. You and I have talked about a lot of different topics. Come back on whatever you want to come back on. There.
Yeah, it's on this trans issue. I'm almost not as sickened by the trans rights activists that are constantly pushing themselves into these spaces as I am with the likes of Girl Guides, who are an organisation that was set up almost 100 years ago to promote girls, to give girls a space where they could develop, build skills.
My daughter loved the Girl Guides.
Communication skills, everything. And you have cowardly leaders that are so hell-bent on virtue signalling that they are willing to put, and I put it this highly, they are willing to put young girls at risk and their own organisations at huge risk in order to push their
I mean, we'll just
ideology.
wait for the first 11-year-old to be raped and then we'll act. That's literally what they're saying.
It's so vile to think that
get your kids out of Girl Guides. If they are not going to tell you, if they're going to send a teenage boy in with your daughter on a trip away, and then they've even said openly, we won't inform parents. You need to get your kids out of these organisations. A mass walk out from those organisations will, should we say, focus minds. But you say it's outrageous. They just don't. They're just like, we'll just do what we want. No, you sodding well won't. You'll obey the sodding law like everyone else.
And parents have got enough to worry about in this day and age. And look, we're rightly tough on parents at times, but look, it is tough to be a parent today. You've got stuff on computers, on phones, and all of the rest of it. It's difficult. It's really difficult. And for parents are doing the right thing, taking their kid to an activity like Guides, where they're going to learn good stuff, they're going to be spending time with others, building skills away from their screens, to think that they have to worry about not only the fact that boys could be in their spaces, but the leader of those troops could lie to them about whether or not that is taking place. It's impossible. It's impossible for parents to keep their daughters safe because of the likes of these people that have taken over organisations that were set up by people that were far, far better than they are.
Sam, be kind. I know, but genuinely, it's people power. That's what is going to make the difference. This 12:25 is the time. We're going to go to a quick break, but just want to let you know, breaking news: large parts of Spain and Portugal, including the capitals Madrid and Lisbon, have been hit by a massive power outage. The Spanish power grid operator Red Electrica says it's working with energy companies to restore power, but parts of France also appear to be affected. Said Seville, Barcelona, and Valencia have all been hit by the outage. Telephone lines down across the country. Parts of Madrid underground had to be evacuated. Traffic lights in the city not working. This is a major, major power outage. Now, the question is, will this be a cyber attack of some sort, or will it be something less questionable? We'll keep you updated on any developments there. I know a lot of people will have family members who spend a lot of time on holiday in places like that or live there, so we'll keep you up to date on that. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Now imagine that the Conservatives, as is probable, are your only option for getting into power, right? They're there, they've got enough councillors along with you. Are you going to just turn that down? Because Nigel Farage has said so. Are all of them going to turn it down? So I think this is where Nigel's command and control culture, which, you know, he's a superstar, he's the reason this party exists, but there does seem to be a tension often in his parties between his need to decide everything from the centre and the need to attract people into politics who can make his parties into bigger institutions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's talk the home of common sense. Me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:29 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000. And let's talk to Mike, who is in Lancashire. Mike, good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, same as me, Julia. Good afternoon, Julia. It's a long time no speak to you.
Well, great to have you
Julia,
on air.
what I was going to say to you, I can't say to you because it was about that because you're in Purda, so I can't say
Oh,
it.
dear, please don't get us in trouble and make me read out the name of every candidate standing in every council election in the whole country. I'd still be on air at 5 p.m. Don't do it to me.
What I'll do, I'll talk instead about the trans right business.
Okay.
I'm a gay man. I am sick to death of this trans business. Do you know something, Julia? I moved to Soho when I was 20.
Yeah.
1970. I'm nearly 68 now.
Party
and
time.
I worked for, oh, God, I feel old. I worked for an international film star and stuff, so I saw all that side of it from the film star side and stuff. But, you know, we went to clubs together, you know, the gays and the transvestites and everything. Transvestites used to use the men's toilets. No problem. There was no problem. Nobody was getting all uppity and, oh, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. And, but now, I mean, Julia, it's just gone mad. It's just gone absolutely mad.
Why do you think that is? And why do you think organisations like, say, Stonewall, who were a prominent and fantastic gay rights organisation, have taken on
exactly, Julia. I mean, me, when I was in my 20s, I fought for gay rights, and Stonewall was great. You know, and we had the flag. But the flag now has just been taken over by every sort of minority group, and it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah, that's for me. That's the thing. I don't look at that flag and think nice things like I always used to. Mike, I'm going to have to leave it there. I've got to get to another call. Mike, so good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Thank you for not getting me in trouble on the council Purda rules. Honestly, go and look at Ofcom rules on this stuff. You've no idea how complicated it is, guys. Let's go to Dan. He's on the line in Portsmouth. Dan, you wanted to talk about the possibility of a reform Tory coalition?
No, not really. It was just I wanted to take you to task on something, actually.
Oh, OK. That's what I've got written here. Right.
Yeah. Several times now I've heard you say that you thought Kemi Badenoch had a stonking PMQs.
Yeah.
I had to turn it off. I thought she was so bad. In fact, I can't remember the last time that any politician on there did anything worthwhile because they don't make them answer the questions.
Well, no, you can't make someone answer the question. I can say no Prime Minister of any political hue has ever answered the question. Them not answering the question is often sort of the giveaway. But you're taking me to task. You're just having a disagreement in opinion. Thinking someone had a good PMQs is an opinion.
Yeah, but you've not let me finish my point. They can make them answer. They can answer the same question again and again and again. Keep asking the same questions. If they don't answer the question, get up and leave. Why do they go? What's the point of it? It's called PMQs. You ask the question, it doesn't even address the question.
OK, but either way, this is something that happens in the House of Commons. That doesn't make a big difference to most people who don't watch it. They might see a clip on the news, you know, that takes 30 seconds. In terms of, you know, whether or not there was a deal between the Reform and the Tories. What do you want to say on that? Because that is what you told my producer you wanted to talk about.
No, it's not. I said absolutely not what I said. I said I only wanted to take you to task on the fact that you said Kemi Badenoch had a really good PMQ.
She's lying to me. She's lying to me.
Oh, yes, she is, unfortunately.
All right, Dan, we'll leave it there. Well, we've got a difference of opinion. I don't think that Kemi Badenoch has set the world alight as Tory leader so far. I think it's a pretty hard gig to do that. But I thought she had a good PMQs last week.
Well, what's the point of PMQs if he doesn't answer the questions?
But she's not in charge of that.
Well, why doesn't the Speaker make him answer the questions? Why don't he ask the same question again and again until he answers it?
I think exactly, but I do think that most prime ministers who get renowned for like dodging questions do actually just end up looking very stupid, and then that serves a purpose itself. Dan, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I know Sam Armstrong, you're very much involved in the political world. What do you make of PMQs and the significance of it, and whether or not anyone answers a question or not?
Well, I think the reality is it's probably less important than it was even 10, 15, 20 years ago, when most people got their news through the evening news and you would get a little bit of a clip on it every Wednesday. And I think this is the challenge now, which is so many people are getting their news from social media, so many people are watching alternative channels and getting it from everywhere, and that very, very, very much favours the likes of Nigel Farage, those with a clear message that can get the cut through, that aren't reliant on those big set pieces anymore. And look, I think Kemi Badenoch has struggled with PMQs. It's certainly a point that Tory MPs will raise. But actually her bigger issue is the capacity to cut through more generally and be able to send a message of what does the Conservative Party stand for in this day and age.
OK, very interesting. 12:34 is the time. Up next, we are going to be talking to, he calls himself a human rights activist, Peter Tatchell, about this trans ongoing issue where a huge number of organisations are simply refusing to obey the Supreme Court ruling, but also the NHS to trust all children who believe that they are transgender for autism. We'll talk about that, plenty more besides, plus polygamous working. Yeah, people who claim to be working from home for one company actually working for 2 or 3 other companies at the same time. How are they able to get away with that? Well, because they ain't doing much for any of them. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. Very much appreciate you joining us. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Let's talk about the ongoing issues involving trans activists and their demands for rights, which I'm never quite sure what they think. They haven't got the same rights as other people. But let's talk about that with Peter Tatchell, who calls himself a human rights activist and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Peter.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. What do you make, just first of all, before we tackle what's been going on with the Supreme Court ruling, as a result of the CAS review last year into treatment of children within the NHS who believe that they are transgender, plan now for the NHS to test all children who believe they are transgender for autism, also to talk to them about their sexuality, about whether they may in fact be gay or bisexual, rather than, as they believe, that they are born in the wrong body, but crucially to see whether they're on the autistic spectrum, given that the CAS review and many other research has shown that actually a huge number of children who believe that they are trans are actually on the autistic spectrum. What do you make of that?
I think the holistic approach is definitely the way to go, and indeed that has been the practice of many people working in this field already. But yes, if there are other issues that may affect people who seek treatment for trans, then all the other potential issues in their lives should be thoroughly investigated. My only concern is that this may further delay treatment, if treatment is indeed designated and approved.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, given that the treatment, as you say, is basically puberty blockers, although that would be illegal under the NHS right now, but we know that there are going to be studies and reviews which would allow this to happen basically by the back door, that actually this is a one-way route for an awful lot of young people into having their bodies and their lives changed forever. Incredibly damaging. No evidence that actually this improves their lives, improves their happiness levels. It should be delayed. And one of the issues at the Tavistock Centre, which was the main place this was happening before the CAS review, was that actually kids were, one appointment, second appointment, there you go, start on the puberty blockers, off you go. I mean, major mental health and physical treatment for children should be something you take slowly, shouldn't it?
It is already taking very, very long time. The average wait for a first appointment for a trans person is 5 years. Mm-hmm. In some parts of the countries, it's 10 or 12 years for the first appointment. So no one is rushed into this process.
Well, no, that's absolutely not true, because Peter, that's not true, because children were being seen.
You had a long time to speak.
Yes, I know, because that is what you're saying isn't true.
Let me answer your question. The holistic approach is good, but I fear it's going to further delay a proper assessment and a decision whether it is appropriate to proceed to hormone treatment and others.
When is it ever appropriate for a child to get hormone treatment?
Let me also answer your other question. You are against puberty blockers for young kids. Well, the NHS...
I'm against untried, untested medical treatment of children, yes. I absolutely stand firm on that.
Puberty blockers are tried and tested.
And they're found to be damaging to children.
And they're widely used on the NHS for non-trans children with precocious puberty. That is, young kids who have early stage...
Needing medical treatment.
Who have early stage puberty. They are prescribed puberty blockers and have been for many years, with safety and efficacy.
Children needing medical treatment. There's no such thing as a trans child. Do you genuinely believe there are children born in the wrong body?
I believe there are children who believe that they are not the...
But they're not born in the wrong body, so they don't need to be treated for something that isn't actually real, do they?
Well, they do if they are genuinely trans, which they are, in 99% of cases.
What's that stat from? Sorry? What's that? 99% of cases they're genuinely trans. Where's that stat from? What does it mean?
Well, we know from the evidence that puberty blockers have been prescribed with great benefit to thousands.
No, we don't. No, that's not what any of the studies say.
Stop interrupting me. Don't be so rude, please.
No, well, stop saying things that aren't true, Peter.
I let you speak.
Oh, that's very good of you. Stop. When I say something untrue, feel free to jump in.
Okay, well, I'm trying to. There have been hundreds of thousands of young people who've gone through trans treatments successfully and happily in dozens of countries around the world.
There's no follow-up research at all. You can't make that statement. You have nothing to back that statement up for. There is no follow-up at all in most sex clinics, most clinics treating kids for this.
The clinics do follow-up. They monitor...
Did you read the CAS review? Did you actually read it?
Yes, I did.
And yet you're still making those statements.
Yes, and Cass did not say that young people should be denied puberty blockers and hormone treatments. They said they should only be applied with caution, and that is correct.
Because the evidence for them was actually that they were not good children. But okay, I just want to clarify that you believe that 99% of children who are genuinely trans. I mean, I don't. No child is born in the wrong body. It's an impossibility. But an awful lot of children seem to think that they are.
I would not use that phrase, and have not used that phrase.
Okay.
Do not impose it upon.
Children who think that they are, huge proportion of them are either turn out to be gay or autistic. That's a very strong argument for not giving this sort of absolutely, no turning back treatment to any child, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And that's why the process is currently, and has for many years, been very slow and arduous. No one is rushed. He goes to a clinic and gets treatment the next day or the next month. It's years and years.
No, that's simply not true. That's simply not true. We know people that has happened to. Honestly, some people may be waiting a long time. A lot of people don't. Right, look, let's come on to another issue. We had that Supreme Court judgment, which didn't change the law. It clarified what the law is now, what it is in the future, and what it has been since 2010 and the Equality Act, which established the rights of women to single-sex spaces, single-sex services and the like. An awful lot of bodies, whether it's NHS hospitals, whether it's Girl Guiding over the weekend and others, have basically said, some theatres and things like that, said, well, we're going to carry on, we believe, they say, respecting trans people's rights, and we are going to continue to allow men who identify as if they were women into the women's toilets and women who believe they identify as men into the men's toilets. Now, that is in breach of the law. Are they right to do so?
Well, first let me say there are two very important issues here: the rights of women and the rights of trans people. We have to find a way, wherever possible, to reconcile them and to ensure that both are protected. Biological sex is a reality. It's very important. Some women are women based on chromosomal sex, and that's correct. Some women are women based on gender identity. That is different, but it's equally valid.
No. The only women are based on biological sex. And then there are men who either mistakenly or claim to believe that they are women. But they're not actually women. They're not women in law, and they're not women in practical reality. They are men.
The Supreme Court did not define what biological sex means. Didn't.
What? So biological. You think that the Supreme Court ruling on biological sex of women includes men who believe they're women?
No, I didn't say that. I said the Supreme Court did not provide a definition of biological sex.
It really did.
No, it didn't. What did it? Tell me what it
was. Very, very clear about women being defined by their biological sex, and we know what the biological sex of a woman is. We know it's from her chromosomes. We know what a woman is, and we know what a man is.
Well,
so how can you be a woman if you're a man?
Biological sex encompasses a range of different characteristics, primarily chromosomes, but also genitals, reproductive organs, hormones, and
different ones from men,
and secondary sex characteristics. So there's a multiplicity of things that define biological sex. So sadly, the Supreme Court did not give guidance on what it defines.
No, but it doesn't need to, because we know what biological sex means, and it means I'm a woman and you're a man, and it's blatantly obvious to everyone you're a man, and it's blatantly obvious to everyone I'm a woman because of our biological differences. So how can you claim some women are women? I hate to tell you, I'm not a subset of women. I'm the only kind. Some women, i.e. all women, are biologically women, and some men who think they are women can wear what they want, live their lives as they want, call themselves what they want, that's fine. But they're not women, and they're specifically not women in law. So what should those organisations do where they have been told explicitly by the Supreme Court that the law is, and has always been, that women are only the people who are allowed into women's single-sex spaces and men are not allowed into them, whatever they call themselves, whatever certificate they've got from the government, and whatever they've had done to themselves or not had done to themselves, whatever they think of themselves. What should those organisations now do? Should they obey the law, or should they continue to allow men who believe they are women into women's spaces?
You have failed to provide a definition of biological sex.
Haven't.
The Supreme Court has failed to provide a definition.
You don't know what a woman is.
In law, definitions are very important, so we avoid confusion and we ignore injustices and ensure fairness. But let's that pass.
No, let's not let that pass. I know what a woman is. Everyone knows what a woman is. Even Keir Starmer apparently miraculously knows what a woman is. Do you genuinely believe that a man with male chromosomes, penis and 2 testicles, genuinely, who says, I am a woman, whether they've got a gender recognition certificate or not, that that person is a kind of woman?
Well, I have a friend who is intersex.
We're not talking about intersex.
Yes, because you think...
No, we're not talking about intersex. That wasn't the question I asked you.
You think it's simple. It's not
There are
simple.
a tiny percentage of people who are intersex, but we're not talking about that. I'm asking you know the question I asked you. Why don't you answer that question?
What are they going to do? What are intersex people going to do with this?
That's not the issue, and you know it's not the issue, because we haven't had intersex people making threats against women and people like J.K. Rowling for the last 10 years.
Most
I
trans
asked you a
people
question.
do not make
Why
threats
don't you?
against anyone.
Oh, well, you're not on the internet very much, then, Peter, by the looks of it.
Yeah, a tiny minority have done bad things, and I've condemned them. I've opposed harassment, abuse, threats, and insults.
But it still keeps coming.
And
apparently a lot of them want to urinate all over us, apparently.
It comes both ways.
Do you think that a man who thinks he's a woman is a woman? That was my question.
Because I defend trans women, I've been threatened with rape, murder, having my house burnt down, and being castrated by people who supposedly are feminists.
Really?
I do not believe.
I've never seen any abuse from that side.
Like that.
Not
all feminists are like that.
Yeah, you don't have to be a feminist for things.
You are keen to generalise.
I asked you a question. Do you believe that a man who is physically intact a man, is chromosomally a man, but who believes himself to be a woman, regardless of how he dresses, what certificate or piece of paper he has in his hand, do you believe that he is a woman?
No. There are
so why are we getting confused then?
I explained at the beginning earlier, there are 2 different types of women.
There aren't.
One based on biological sex.
You just
and one
so you do think he's a woman.
Identity.
So you do think he's a woman.
If you stop interrupting me, I will explain. I've never been so badly and rudely treated by any interviewer before you, Julia.
Because you won't answer my question. Do you think he's a woman? Yes, is the answer.
I respect you entirely. But I'm not going to be bullied by you and having you interrupting me when I'm trying to make a reasoned point. I've listened to you with courtesy and politeness.
But you're not answering any of my questions. Is that man a woman? You're saying no, and then you say, but he is a kind of woman. So is he a woman or not? Yes or no?
Trans women are trans women. Trans men are trans men.
So he's not a woman? So he's not allowed in the bathroom of a woman then? Is it? In which case...
That is the problem with the Supreme Court decision and its interpretation by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. They are saying that trans women cannot use the female toilet.
Because they're men.
And they, in certain circumstances, they cannot use the men's facilities either. So where are they supposed to go?
They didn't say that. They said you should use the toilets of your actual biological sex. They were very. I mean, they were very, very clear about that. They couldn't have been more explicit. Final attempt at this question: what should those bodies, hospitals, Girl Guides, or whatever, what should they do in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling? Should they or should they not allow men, you call them trans women, but men into women's safe personal spaces? Yes or no?
The Supreme Court has said that trans women must use women's toilets.
No, they said the opposite.
Can you imagine the shock of women going into the toilet and being confronted by a trans man? That's going to cause huge distress. And they've also said that trans women have to use men's toilets, which could put them at greater risk of robbery and rape. That is not a good decision.
Because women are at so much risk from being around men in the toilets. It's almost like there was a reason why women didn't want men in their toilets. We'll have to leave it. We're so over time. Peter Tatchell, human rights activist, do come on again. Honestly, I only interrupt if someone says something that's not true or I don't get an answer to the question I've asked. We're going to go to a quick break. This is Talk.
Kemi Badenoch has branded Sir Keir Starmer a coward who has no moral core. The Conservative leader has accused the Prime Minister of lacking the courage to admit his mistakes as she attacks his response to the Supreme Court ruling. Now, she has actually made, or she's written an article in The Telegraph, actually, urging people to vote Conservative in the elections that are happening on Thursday. And then Labour has responded to this, saying her deeply personal attack on the Prime Minister is a sign she was flailing and desperately trying to make herself relevant.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk, the home of common sense. We are almost out of time. Going to squeeze in one last topic because I've been talking about it the whole show. We're going to talk to Danny Shaw. He's a crime policing and justice commentator. Joins us to talk about the rise of polygamous workers and the efforts, not just by employers, but by police to crack down on this. A very good afternoon to you, Danny.
Hi, Julia.
Apologies, it's going to be such a short time, but there's been an increase in the number of people who are working from home. You don't really get away with it if you work from home, who have basically got more than one job, 2, sometimes even 3 different jobs, officially full-time jobs, same hours, and they're sitting at home on their Zooms and their Teams meetings, and they're basically being paid by 2 or 3 different companies doing the same job. But they're finally being found out. But what is terrifying for most of us is how they weren't found out for all that time before.
I found this completely extraordinary. I mean, you know, I don't know how you can hold down more than one full-time job. I mean, obviously, you know, as freelancers, people who are self-employed, contractors obviously can do a variety of different jobs at the same time. But how can someone, for example, a social worker, be a social worker in Hampshire and also Southend in Essex?
That was one of the
apparently.
Yeah.
What happened, and that person was found out on a Teams call with Hampshire staff. This person answered the phone and said, "You've got through to Southend Children's Services," and he was found out and sacked. But there have been apparently others who've got 3 full-time jobs, sometimes even more. It's the stay-at-home, work-at-home culture, I'm afraid, that has allowed this to happen, whereby offices, employers don't compel people to come in, so they're at home. They're able to pretend they're working when they're not. They're working for someone else. Yeah. Perhaps the way to do it is more intrusive supervision, I would say, Julia, demanding that people go to the office 2 or 3 times a week at least.
Exactly. So you have to turn up. Well, it's the same with benefits offices, wasn't it? If you don't have to turn up anywhere, you can happily be working cash in hand and no one notices because you have to turn up because you haven't got a job. You have to turn up today. Well, then you've got to take the day off work. But this is something that's definitely risen since working from home became much more a bigger thing during the pandemic and since. But there are now sort of TikTok advisors on how to do this, how to juggle. You buy this particular app that will make your mouse on your computer jiggle all the time, so it looks like you're working. So, but what amazes me is how do companies not know that their staff are getting nothing done?
Well, because there's this culture where we're not in the office together, and so someone's given a project to do or some work to do, and and they're left to get on with it, and perhaps they check in at the end of the day or they do a little bit of the work. And they're sort of pretending that it's taking a lot longer than it actually is. Yeah. And I think also some employers are scared to get rid of people or lose people because in some sectors, as you know, it's very difficult to hire the right staff. Yeah. And so staff are given the option of working from home. And let's be honest, there are benefits to it. Saves time on transport and travel, can be more convenient.
But the bosses have no idea what you're getting done. It's just